Chapter 1105. Previously, Yang Yi had promised Lon Xian that he would bring Murphy's concert in Taiwan, which was scheduled for the beginning of June. However, for this concert, Murphy had prepared for a long time. Yang Yi had also studied and practiced with her. They had even prepared a few new songs for this concert. After all, this concert was held in Baobei City, Taiwan, which was also Murphy's hometown. It was also the place where Yang Chongwei had stayed for a few years before he went abroad. Therefore, this concert was of great significance to both Yang Yi and Murphy. It was worth mentioning that for this trip to Taiwan, although Yang Chongwei was not willing to go with them, Shishi's grandfather, Mo Henian, and grandmother, Zhou Mingyu, would go back to their hometown to visit their relatives. It could be said that they were returning home with honor and glory. Therefore, at the end of May, on the Wednesday after Yang Yi had bought the table tennis table, Mo Henian and Zhou Mingyu flew back from Dezhou. They planned to visit their grandson and granddaughter first, and stay in Jiangxing for more than a week. They would then go to Taiwan together the following weekend. Mo Henian rarely returned to China. Zhou Mingyu, on the other hand, had come back twice in the past year. The first time was when she had to go back to Harbor City, so she took a detour to Jiangxing to visit her grandson and granddaughter. The second time was when one of her sisters opened a clothing store in Shanghai. She came back to support her, so she also made a trip to Jiangxing. However, both times, Zhou Mingyu was in a hurry and left after a day or two. On Wednesday morning, Yang Yi and Murphy brought Tong Tong, who did not need to go to school, to the international airport in Jiangxing's Binhai district to pick up their grandparents. The old man was still dressed in a cowboy outfit. It was inconvenient to wear a cowboy hat, so he held it in his hand. However, the dark-colored checkered shirt was obviously matched by Zhou Mingyu. The color of the shirt looked mature and not old-fashioned. When they walked out of the passage from afar, he looked like a fashionable old man who refused to admit his age. However, upon closer inspection, Mo Henian was still as stern as before. When he saw Yang Yi, he even snorted softly to express his dissatisfaction. Although the old man was a farmer in America, he was not uninformed. Of course, he knew about Yang Yi's current net worth. However, it was also because he knew that Yang Yi was definitely one of the richest men in China that Mo Henian was unhappy with Yang Yi. This was the same reaction that Mo Henian had when he first found out that Yang Yi and Murphy were together. When his son-in-law was still a poor boy, that was his first impression of Yang Yi. His grandfather was worried that his daughter would not have enough food to eat and warm clothes to wear. Now that his son-in-law had become rich, the old man was worried that the rich man would turn bad. He would be pursued by a group of women and spend all day outside. His daughter would be wronged because of this. Of course, Zhou Mingyu had also asked Murphy this question on the phone. Knowing that Yang Yi was still the same as before and had never left the three of them to spend time outside, they were relieved. However, he would still be unhappy if he had to be. Did a father-in-law need a reason to be unhappy with his son-in-law? Yang Yi had already understood the old man's character. He did not care at all. Moreover, he had even brought the family heirloom. Yang Yi took Tong Tong from Murphy's arms and smiled as he held Tong Tong's hand and said, "Tong Tong, greet Grandpa." Although they hadn't seen each other for a year, it wasn't like little Wancheng hadn't seen his grandfather before. Usually, when Mo Fei had a video call with her mother, she would pull little Wancheng over and let him say hello to her grandparents. Otherwise, how could Tong Tong have learned to call them grandpa and grandma at such a young age? However, Tong Tong was a little reserved now. It seemed that this was the first time he had seen his grandpa in person. When Yang Yi went to the US last year, Tong Tong was still too young. He was only a few months old, so how could he remember? His eyes were wide open, and he pouted his watery little mouth. He was only focused on looking at his grandpa and trying to distinguish between them, so he did not call him grandpa out loud. When he saw Tong Tong, the unhappiness in Mo Henian's eyes instantly disappeared. His stern face became gentle. He smiled and reached out his hand. "Tong Tong, come and give grandpa a hug. Let me see if you have gained any weight." What an amazing observation angle. When Tong Tong heard this, he instinctively rejected. He turned his little head and reached out to hug his father's neck. He did not want to be hugged by anyone else. "Are you still shy?" Zhou Mingyu walked over with a smile. She also reached out her hand and said, Tong Tong, let Grandma hug you, okay? Of course he could hug his grandma. Tong Tong had played with his grandma in February this year, so he had a familiar impression of her. He looked at his grandma for a while, then decisively abandoned his father, and went into his grandma's arms. The little fellow was hugged by his grandma. He twisted his butt and felt that it was the same sitting position that he was familiar with. He immediately calmed down, as if he had regained his liveliness at home. He grinned and pointed with his finger as he said to his grandma, "Grandma, Mom, Papa?" "Grandpa too," Murphy reminded him. Tong Tong tried to recall his grandma's and grandpa's facial shape and appearance. He nodded and said in a childish voice, "Grandpa, there's Tong Tong. Our Tong Tong is so smart. He can already speak so much." Zhou Mingyu was grinning from ear to ear. Murphy smiled and said, "Actually, he can speak a lot. For example, he can learn to say what he wants when he eats, what he wants, and what he wants. He might be a little embarrassed today, so he didn't say anything." Mo Henian watched and listened from the side. Although he was laughing happily, his heart was itching. In the end, he couldn't hold back and asked again, "Let me hug Tong Tong." "Let Grandpa hug him, okay?" Murphy hurriedly asked Tong Tong. Tong Tong's feeling of unfamiliarity faded a lot. He nodded and said, "Okay." Mo Henian's wrinkled face immediately bloomed into a smile. He reached out and picked up Tong Tong, weighed him, and patted the little fellow's butt. He looked at Tong Tong with a smile and said, "You've grown up. When Grandpa saw you last year, you were still a little thing. Now you're so heavy." "Yes, he's quite heavy. Grandma can't hold him anymore." Zhou Mingyu joked a little exaggeratedly. Then she smiled and said to Murphy, "I always feel that Tong Tong is heavier than little Lulu. Fei Fei, do you still remember little Lulu? Your Aunt Yun's granddaughter. She's 2 months older than Tong Tong. She's not just heavy. I saw the photo she sent the day before yesterday. Our Tong Tong is even taller than her granddaughter." When Yang Yi heard this, he immediately came over and said, "Dad, if you think he's heavy, let me help you carry him." Mo Henian was a little unhappy that his flattery didn't work. He held Tong Tong with one hand and waved his other hand. Go, go, go. Do whatever you need to do. I'm not so old that I can't even carry my grandson." Tong Tong didn't know whether he understood or found the bickering between his grandpa and his dad very interesting. He giggled in his grandpa's arms. Chapter 1106. It was not easy for Mo Henian to hug his grandson. Tong Tong was now full of energy and liked to run around and explore things that interested him. Therefore, the little boy was quite obedient at the airport. But when he got home, he began to be unwilling to be held and twisted his body, wanting to get down. No hug." Tong Tong mumbled as he tried to break free from his grandfather's grip. Da. Mo Henian had no choice but to put him down. Tong Tong's happy smile returned, and he bounced his little butt as he ran to Dodo, who had just jumped down from the tree. Compared to the other 2 cats, Dodo's personality was cold and gentle. Usually, when Shishi's little friends came to the house, Dodo was not willing to play with them and would hide away without a trace. However, Dodo was very patient with Tong Tong. Even if Tong Tong grabbed Dodo's tail, Dodo would only turn its head to look at Tong Tong. Obviously, Dodo knew that Tong Tong was chasing after it, so it slowed down and waited for Tong Tong to catch up. Then, it twisted its tail and crawled between Tong Tong's legs. Although Tong Tong could not catch Dodo and was circled around by Dodo, this was just a game between Dodo and Tong Tong. The little guy giggled happily. Grandsons were no match for granddaughters. In the evening, Shishi came back from school. Before she got out of the car, she eagerly clung to the car window and shouted excitedly, "Grandpa! Grandma! Grandpa! Grandma!" After her father parked the car, the little girl jumped out of the car with her little backpack and happily pounced on Mo Henian. The old man's face immediately bloomed with a smile again, and hugged this little cotton-padded jacket. "I also want to hug Grandma," Shishi said with a grin. Good. My Shishi is so sensible." Zhou Mingyu smiled and reached out to hug Shishi. However, she almost didn't manage to hug her. After all, Shishi was already a big child. In the end, her grandmother only hugged her for a while before putting the little girl down. She did not mind. After Lan Xian greeted her grandparents, she could not wait to drag them home. Each of them held one hand, and she skipped in front. Zhou Mingyu's backpack. How could the old people bear to see their granddaughter carry such a heavy backpack? They could not wait to help her carry everything. Of course, when Yang Yi, who was about to send Lan Xian home, saw the scene, he secretly sighed in his heart. Luckily, the old people didn't let the old people take care of the child. Otherwise, with this kind of spoiling, she will really think of herself as a little princess. Although she usually liked to imagine herself as a cute little princess in her diary, and sometimes when she wrote short stories, in reality, she was not pretentious at all. She did not have princess syndrome at all. This could be seen from how she usually helped her parents with the housework. However, Yang Yi would not spoil the fun and criticize the old people now. After all, the old people rarely came once a year. Let them dote on their granddaughter. She did not know what her father was thinking. She knew that her grandparents were coming today, so she had a lot to say. At this moment, she was talking to her grandfather with joy. "Grandpa, let me tell you. Today, I told little Yu that my grandfather was coming to see me." Then little Yu asked, "Is your grandfather the one who has a deer at home?" "There's a deer at home?" Mo Henian was on the farm. Usually, the farm work was complicated and busy, so he had somewhat forgotten about this matter. Fortunately, Zhou Mingyu had a good memory, so she reminded him with a smile. "It's the deer that you brought back when little Yang and the others came last year." "Yes." She nodded and said, "I also call it Little White, because it has very beautiful white spots on its body." "Oh." Mo Henian remembered and said, "That deer. Later, it grew up a little, so we put it back in the forest." "I know. When Papa told me about it, I was so sad." Shishi's mood was a little low, but soon, she thought of the topic just now and giggled in high spirits. "I told little Yu about it." Then little Yu asked, "Is there a deer's grandfather at home?" It turned out that the little girl felt that the description of her deskmate was very interesting. "Who is little Yu?" Zhou Mingyu asked curiously. "She's my deskmate. She's also very nice, and her papa is a policeman." She always felt that policemen were very powerful. With Shishi at home, the atmosphere suddenly became lively, and Tong Tong came to join in the fun. "Grandpa, let me show you a ping-pong performance." After asking her grandparents to sit down, Shishi ran to the side hall excitedly and took her ping-pong paddle and a light ping-pong ball. "Wow, this is awesome. Shishi, you can play ping-pong now?" Zhou Mingyu applauded with a smile and praised. "Yes. I'm the one who learned it. Dad also taught me." The little girl shook her little butt embarrassedly and said shyly, "Grandma, if I don't play well, can you let me try again? I've just started learning." "Of course, Grandma will accompany you and watch you play ping-pong. You can play it very well," Zhou Mingyu said with a smile. "Don't worry, Grandma is looking forward to it." So, Shishi performed a ping-pong ball for her grandparents. It had to be said that although Shishi was a beginner, her reaction speed was not bad. Moreover, she exercised with her father every day, so her body coordination was also very good. She performed 20 ping-pong balls for the first time. Yes. That's very good." Zhou Mingyu was a little surprised and applauded for Shishi with a smile. "Actually, I can do 32 at most." Shishi pursed her lips and explained seriously. Mo Henian said loudly, "Then continue to work hard and break your record. Don't talk about this. The child is already doing very well." "How old is Shishi?" Zhou Mingyu said angrily. She was worried that her granddaughter would be tired. After Sisi continued to perform table tennis excitedly for a while, Mo Fei, who had just come over with a plate of fruit, smiled and said, "Sisi, since you have performed for Grandpa and Grandma, why don't you let your younger brother perform for Grandpa and Grandma?" "Okay." Shishi agreed without hesitation. Her voice was crisp and pleasant, but soon she fell into hesitation. "But what should my brother perform?" Without waiting for Murphy's reminder, Shishi's eyes suddenly lit up. She giggled and said, "I know. My brother can dance." Under the expectant gazes of Mo Henian and Zhou Mingyu, Shishi ran to her father and asked for his phone. Yang Yi's phone had songs in it. Shishi found the song, "The King Sent Me to Patrol the Mountains," that she had recorded with her father a few years ago and clicked play. Not only were the lyrics funny, but the melody was also very rhythmic. It was like a dance song that made people want to stand up and dance. When Tong Tong heard the song, his eyes lit up. He even waved his little hand happily. "Brother, get up. Let's dance for Grandpa." Shishi put her phone on the coffee table and excitedly pulled Tong Tong up from the carpet. After little Momo stood up, he looked up at his sister. When he saw his sister twisting and dancing, his interest was completely aroused. He giggled and raised his little hands high, as if he was dancing ballet. However, his feet were dancing in small steps like tap dancing. With a twist and a twist, Xiao Tianguan danced happily. It even giggled as it circled around its sister. Although it was an impromptu and random dance by the little girl, the excitement still made the two elders laugh heartily. Yang Yi and Mo Fei also sat on the side. While watching, they smiled at each other and held each other's hands. This song was actually very meaningful to Murphy and Yang Yi. The first time Yang Yi sang this song for Shishi was the morning after Yang Yi proposed to Murphy. At that time, they were still living in the small building above the coffee shop. After that, Murphy also practiced this song with Shishi and sang it for Yang Yi on his birthday. Listening to it now, it was full of memories. Shishi, who was still a little girl at that time, was now a big sister who could dance with her little brother. Of course, no matter how fast time passed, the wonderful thing was that the family was still happy together. Chapter 1107. After Yang Yi bought the ping pong table, Shishi wanted to invite her friends over to play ping pong. Although Grandpa and Grandma were coming over to stay this week, Shishi didn't think it would affect her. She still sent out invitations to her friends in high spirits. On Saturday morning, Lu Xiaoyu, Yu Xiaowei, Chen Shiyan, and Nan Zhaoyu were all sent over by their parents. The only exception was Yang Luoqi. The little girl had relatives coming over today, so she couldn't leave. Nan Zhaoyu was the last to arrive. As soon as he entered, he saw Mo Henian, who was holding a pair of large scissors and trimming the flower bed. The old man glanced at him and coolly pressed down on the front of his cowboy hat with his finger. The corner of his mustached mouth curled up slightly, and it could be considered a cowboy greeting. "Whose gardener is so cool?" Nan Zhaoyu was dumbfounded. He stood there in a daze, as if a few Remingtons were poking at him, stupidly motionless. "Zhaoyu, you're here too." Shishi cheered and happily welcomed him with her friends. Lu Xiaoyu bounced beside Shishi and said with a smile, "Nan Zhaoyu, you're being rude. You didn't even greet Shishi's grandfather when you saw him." Nan Zhaoyu finally came back to his senses after being reminded by his friends. He scratched his head and looked at Mo Henian a little embarrassedly. He said softly, "Hello, Grandpa." "No, you're not calling him Grandpa." Yu Xiaowei, who was 2 years older, corrected him rigidly. "Shishi calls him Grandpa, but we should call Shishi's grandpa, Grandpa Mo. That's more polite." Shishi didn't think much of it at first. She blinked her big eyes and looked at Sister Xiaowei in surprise. Not only was she surprised, but she also admired her. Sister Xiaowei knows so much. "It's because I read a lot of books." "It's okay, Shishi. You can read more extracurricular books in the future, and you'll know a lot of things." Yu Xiaowei honestly explained and comforted Shishi, as if she was afraid that Shishi would be discouraged. Seeing this, Nan Zhaoyu could only obediently change his greeting. "Hello, Grandpa Mo." "Yes, they're all good kids." Mo Henian couldn't be serious. He smiled and pointed at the villa. "Go inside and play. Your Granny Zhou has prepared a lot of snacks that she brought back from America." Yes. Let me tell you, it's delicious. I've eaten a lot these few days." Lan Xian's eyes lit up and she shouted, let's go back to the house." Thus, the children chatted and laughed and ran back like a swarm of bees. Lan Xian led the way while Shishi blended into the crowd. At first glance, Lan Xian looked more like the owner than Shishi. However, on Thursday morning, when Lan Xian came to school with Shishi, she tried some American chocolates, soft candies, nuts, and other snacks that she didn't have time to take out for her the night before. After that, she couldn't wait to stay at Shishi's house. Zhou Mingyu was very enthusiastic about the children. She took out a few cans of snacks and asked the children to eat. If Yang Yi wasn't worried that they would eat too many snacks and not have an appetite for lunch, the children would probably be eating snacks for the whole morning. It was a pity that Zhou Mingyu couldn't spend more time with the children. After she greeted them for a while, she took her bag and said goodbye to the children. Then, she went to the studio's recording studio with Murphy to practice singing. Yang Yi also prepared a new song for her. When the time came, Murphy would invite her mother to sing this new song with her at her concert in Taiwan. This was a small gift that Yang Yi and Murphy prepared for Zhou Mingyu. Zhou Mingyu used to be a small singer, but she wasn't very famous in Harbor City. Naturally, she didn't have many opportunities to hold a concert. Murphy's gift could be said to be helping her mother realize her dream. You all can play in the house first. Your grandpa Emo and I are trimming the branches next to the table tennis table. When it's done, I'll let you play table tennis. Shishi, you have to take care of your brother and play with Momo. Okay? Yang Yi reminded the little guys. Although Mo Henian couldn't stay idle and wanted to do something, Yang Yi couldn't leave his father-in-law to work outside alone. He greeted the children and walked out of the door again. This was nothing. The children were playing in the house, and he and Mo Henian were working in the yard. They could take care of them, so there was no need for them to sneak out of the yard. Moreover, Shishi's friends were quite well behaved. They had come to the house to play so many times, so they could be considered regular guests. Yang Yi was more at ease. After Yang Yi went out, the children began to discuss heatedly again. Wow, Shishi, your grandparents are really cool, Chun Shuryan said enviously. My grandparents aren't so awesome. They're all old. Yu Xiaowei nodded and said in agreement, that's right. My grandmother is also at home, but I still feel that Cece's grandfather and grandmother look young. I like Shishi's grandfather very much. He's very handsome, and he wears a hat. Nan Zhaoyu's eyes were blurred, and he sighed with fascination. Hee, let me tell you, my grandfather also bought a cowboy hat for my brother and me. When Shishi heard her grandfather and grandmother being praised, she also felt honored. She said with a smile, it's my grandfather's farm. Many people wear cowboy hats because the sun is very hot. Shishi felt that it was not enough to just talk about it, so she ran upstairs excitedly. In the master bedroom and the guest bedroom, she found her and her brother's cowboy hats, and took them down to show them to her friends. Tong Tong was originally in Yu Xiaowei's arms. Yu Xiaowei was 2 years older than Shishi. Although she was not much taller than Shishi, she was much more mature than Shishi. Tong Tong felt very comfortable being carried by Yu Xiaowei, and he did not struggle to get down from the sofa. He was playing with a toy car in his hand, and Sister Xiaowei held another one for him. Little Wanqing felt that he cooperated very well with Sister Xiaowei. He stuffed the little cart in his hand into Sister Xiaowei's hand, and Sister Xiaowei helped him hold it. If he wanted to change to another one, Sister Xiaowei would also obediently let go of her hand. So comfortable. At this moment, Tong Tong heard some noise and saw his biological sister running down the stairs wearing a cowboy hat. She was holding a small cowboy hat in her hand. Tong Tong immediately recognized the small cowboy hat. There was a simple drawing of a cow's head on it. His father had drawn it for him. The hat. The little guy grinned and pointed to his cowboy hat. Yes, cried the little guy. Yes, it's yours. Shishi walked over and helped her brother put on the hat. She even naughtily covered her brother's eyes with the brim of the hat. Then she giggled and ran away. Luckily, Yu Xiaowei was also smiling as she helped Tong Tong adjust the hat. Tong Tong did not know what he was thinking. He took the hat off his head and grabbed it with his small hand. Then he turned around and crawled out of Sister Xiaowei's arms. This little fellow took advantage of his young and ignorant age to grab Sister Xiaowei's clothes and stand up in Sister Xiaowei's arms. Luckily, Yu Xiaowei had a gentle personality, so she did not push him away. Hee. Tong Tong's eyes curved into crescents. After he stood up, he looked at Sister Xiaowei's pretty face and grinned foolishly for a while. Then he put the hat on Sister Xiaowei. The hat was naturally not suitable for Yu Xiaowei, so it could not cover her head. However, Yu Xiaowei did not mind. She could feel Tong Tong's friendliness, so she pursed her lips and smiled gently. Tong Tong was quite satisfied with his wonderful idea. After he received Sister Xiaowei's response, he happily waved his two small hands and giggled with her. The happiness on this side was faint, but Xishi's side was much more lively. Xishi, help me put it on. Chen Shiyin shouted excitedly. I want to try it on too. Lu Xiaoyu also said excitedly, including Nan Zhaoyu, who admired the cowboy costume. The few children fought to be the first to put on the cowboy hat. After they put it on, they tried to act cool. Xishi, can you take a picture for me? Chen Shiyin was the first to put on the hat. She made a cool pose and asked, still not satisfied. Xishi had a camera, and Xishi knew how to take pictures. This was nothing new among these children. Okay. Xishi answered sweetly. But I have to go upstairs to get my camera. I'll go with you. I want to take a picture with your doll. Chen Shiyin shouted. I'll go too. Thus the little fellows ran up like a swarm of bees. Chapter 1108. While the children were playing in the villa, Yang Yi was wearing a straw hat and holding onto a ladder as he accompanied Mo Henian to trim the branches and flowers in the yard. It had to be said that the weather today was indeed hot. Although Yang Yi and the old man were wearing wide-brimmed hats, their backs were soaked in the hot sun. Dad, do you want to take a break? Let me help you. Yang Yi said with a smile as he stood on the lawn and held onto the ladder. No need. You're still young and haven't done any heavy work. Mo Henian panted slightly as he scolded them. Yang Yi could only smile bitterly and didn't dare to talk back. The old man's temper was a little stubborn. Actually, there were specialized gardeners in the villa area who would come every week to trim the flowers and plants. However, the frequency of this kind of tree trimming was not that high. Usually, they would only come by once every month or two. Of course, if you wanted, you could get someone to help you with the gardening at any time as long as you paid. However, as an American farm owner, Mo Henian was used to being self-sufficient and working with other cowboys. He just rolled up his sleeves and started doing it himself. It had to be mentioned that although Mo Henian and Yang Chongguei were both stubborn and didn't like to be extravagant in their lives, there was still a difference between them. Mo Henian liked to ponder over the details while Yang Chongguei, although an old man from the countryside, was still a proud young master in his bones. If it was the same kind of gardening work, if Yang Yi suggested that the whole family roll up their sleeves and get it done, the two old men might help out. However, just like before, if Yang Yi suggested that the gardeners do the work, Mo Henian would complain about it and feel that the others couldn't do it as well as he could. On the other hand, Yang Chongguei would probably just nod his head casually and walk away with his hands behind his back. The attitude of a young master from a big family would inadvertently reveal a little at this time. Of course, this was a little far-fetched. Yang Yi still had to think of a way to convince his father-in-law. Dad, I'm also from the countryside. Why don't you take a break first and have a sip of tea under the shade of a tree and watch how I do? Since you have experience, wouldn't it be better to give me some pointers from the side? Yang Yi said with a smile. Mo Henian pondered for a moment. This idea is not bad. Teach this kid a lesson. Otherwise, when I return to the US, who will work for me? Moreover, he could also temper this brat's temperament. So what if he's a billionaire? Isn't he my son-in-law? Thus Mo Henian came down. He sipped a few mouthfuls of tea under the awning at the side. Unable to stay idle, he came over to help Yang Yi hold the ladder. While giving Yang Yi pointers, he chatted with Yang Yi. Mommy is too young, so I won't talk about it. How do you plan to arrange Xishi's education? Mo Henian asked. The country has been developing well these years, but when it comes to education, I always feel that it's a little lacking. Over the years, many of Baobei's relatives have approached me to find out more about sending their children overseas. If you plan to send her overseas to study, I can also contact a good school for you. Over the years, I've helped the family a lot. I know which schools are good and which are not. Although Yang Yi did not think that overseas schools were good, the old man did mean well. Thus, he pondered for a moment before replying with a smile. Dad, Xishi is actually quite happy to be studying in the country now. You see, she has so many friends. If you ask her to study in the US all of a sudden, she probably won't be able to adapt and won't be able to leave these good friends behind. Also, we've arranged for her to go to the best private school in the country. The teaching resources there are not bad. Therefore, I think that if the goal is to broaden her horizons, it's better to let her finish her basic education in the country. She can then consider going overseas for her future studies. Emohenian did not really mind. He nodded slightly, agreeing with Yang Yi's arrangement. Children indeed need to have more social interactions. The children on our farm often run around with the children in town. In terms of character, they are much better than the children in the city who stay at home all day. Look at the US, there are so many autistic children. Emohenian sighed as he spoke. It was unknown whether he was wiping sweat or feeling sad. He gently wiped the corners of his eyes before saying, when Shishi was overseas, Murphy said that she was worried that she would not dare to play with other children because she did not have a father. She was afraid that she would be autistic. Now that I see so many of her friends coming over to play with her and smiling so happily, I'm relieved. Although the old man didn't criticize Yang Yi, his words still faintly revealed a hint of resentment. In the past 2 years it had faded quite a bit, but thinking back to that time, Emohenian still felt a little unhappy. Yang Yi remained silent for a while before saying softly, "Dad, don't worry. We're heading in the right direction now. Things are already very good now. In the future, our lives will definitely get better." The autistic young lady that the grandfather was worried about was currently surrounded by a group of children laughing and joking. Shishi, I want to take a picture with the panda." Nan Zhaoyu, who was wearing Shishi's cowboy hat, waved at Shishi, who was holding her card camera, as he walked excitedly to the large panda doll placed beside the bed. Lan Xian, who was digging through Shishi's bookshelf, saw this and immediately shouted, No, this is what I want to take later. I want to take a cowboy picture with the panda." "Alright then, you take a picture with the panda. I'll look for something else." Nan Zhaoyu could only pout and change his target. Shishi, on the other hand, enthusiastically helped him find a doll. In her super big bedroom, there was no lack of all kinds of dolls. "Zhaoyu, how about this? I once bought it from my papa. It's 18 little monk dolls." Shishi excitedly took out 18 palm-sized dolls from the cabinet and shook them in front of Nan Zhaoyu. Don't be fooled by the appearance of these 18 little monk dolls. In fact, they were from a very popular domestic cartoon. Each little monk was made into a cartoon image. They were very cute and were very popular among children. In order to buy these 18 little dolls, Shishi pestered her father for a long time before her father agreed to exchange a very small amount of gold coins for the entire set of dolls. "Okay. Shishi, help me set it up." Nan Zhaoyu really liked it. He stood beside the desk in high spirits with his hands in his pockets, making a pose. At this time, Lan Xian finally found a jar of nut snacks on Shishi's bookshelf that she put there 2 days ago. There were almonds, cashews, peeled macadamia nuts, and so on. They all tasted very good. Lan Xian was worried that if she brought them home, her parents wouldn't let her eat them, so she hid them at Shishi's place. However, she was very generous to her good friends. Moreover, since it was such a big jar, Lan Xian felt that it wouldn't be a problem to share some with everyone. Therefore, after the little girl took it out, she acted as if it was her own home and asked her friends to eat. "Xian, help me get some, I want to take a picture." Nan Zhaoyu saw that everyone was eating and praising the snacks. He also felt a little hungry, so he quickly called out, I'm coming. Lan Xian grabbed a few cashews and ran over noisily. She glanced at Nan Zhaoyu standing with his hands in his pockets and said enthusiastically, "Come on, open your mouth. I'll let you eat." Nan Zhaoyu opened his mouth, and Lan Xian directly stuffed all the cashews into Nan Zhaoyu's mouth. Suddenly, Nan Zhaoyu could only whimper. His mouth was stuffed full and he couldn't speak. Shishi was busy setting up the little monk. She looked up and saw this scene. She couldn't help but giggle and say, "Zhaoyu, you can't take pictures like this. It's too ugly." Nan Zhaoyu still couldn't speak. He could only chew hard with an embarrassed look on his face. At this time, Lu Xiaoyu wandered over to Shishi's dressing table near the bathroom in her big bedroom. "Hey Shishi, what's this?" Lu Xiaoyu exclaimed in surprise. She found a set of makeup tools on the dressing table that she had never seen in Shishi's room before. Chapter 1109. Here. Here. Compared to the liveliness upstairs, the living room downstairs was much quieter. Yu Xiaowei was sitting on the sofa, and in front of her, little Momo was flipping through his toy basket. Fortunately, the little guy was wearing pants today, and not just wrapped in a diaper and wandering around. Tong Tong wanted to play with Sister Xiaowei, so he took out all his toys. There were some transformable Autobots, various car models, robot models, and some dolls that he got from his sister. After searching for a while, he stood up excitedly and took out his favorite Autobot and passed it to Sister Xiaowei. Okay. Yu Xiaowei's voice was soft and gentle, and Tong Tong felt comfortable listening to it. However, when he saw that Sister Xiaowei was only holding the Autobot in her arms, he became anxious. No. Tong Tong waved his little hand and walked over. He pouted his little mouth and taught Sister Xiaowei how to play. Oh, so you can transform like this. Sister Xiaowei's surprised voice rang in his ears. Tong Tong raised his little head and looked at Sister Xiaowei's face. He grinned happily. I have this. Tong Tong excitedly took out another transformable robot and gestured with Sister Xiaowei. He wanted to use these two toys to fight with Sister Xiaowei, but Sister Xiaowei did not understand. He could only try his best to explain with his hands and feet. Yu Xiaowei and Tong Tong played downstairs for a while. Tong Tong was still in high spirits, but Yu Xiaowei was a little reserved. Why isn't she coming down yet? Yu Xiaowei turned around on the sofa uneasily and turned her head to look at the stairs. She and Tong Tong had been upstairs for too long, and this made Yu Xiaowei feel very insecure. After all, this was not her own home. Although there was still a little girl who pestered her to play, without her best friend, Yu Xiaowei felt like she was lost in a maze when she was alone in such a big house. Finally, Yu Xiaowei could not stand it anymore. She stood up from the sofa and reached out her right hand. She whispered, "Mommy, let's go upstairs and find Shishi, your sister, okay? Don't play with the toys anymore." Tong Tong blinked and put down the robot in his hands. He naturally held Sister Xiaowei's hand and climbed upstairs step by step with her. She would not have known if she did not look, but when she did, she was shocked. Pushing open the door to Cece's master bedroom, Yu Xiaowei was instantly dumbfounded. She saw her friends who had completely changed. Chen Shiyun's eyebrows were drawn thickly, and she was also wearing lipstick. Moreover, it was a dark blood-red lipstick. However, Chen Shiyun did not know how to apply lipstick at all. She painted the skin around her mouth bright red, making it look as if her mouth was a size bigger. Lan Xian had also put on some makeup. She loved eyebrow pencil and eyeshadow. That's right, she had drawn herself into the shape of a panda. She had huge dark circles under her eyes and looked silly, but she didn't mind at all. Instead, she proudly showed it off. The most flirtatious was Nan Xiaoyu. Wait, what happened? 10 minutes ago, Lu Xiaoyu found a set of makeup tools on the dressing table. Shishi's dressing table only had some skincare products and hairbands. Lu Xiaoyu screamed as if she had discovered a new continent. Due to the nature of Lu Xiaoyu's work and family habits, Lu Xiaoyu's parents had always been barefaced and did not wear makeup, so Lu Xiaoyu found it very novel. Lan Xian ran over first. After taking a look, she replied loudly, "These are makeup tools. Lipstick, eyebrow pencil. My mom has them too." Cece, who was arranging the little monk doll, raised her head and glanced at it. She giggled and said, "This is my mama's. Because my grandmother's mirror is very small, Mama and my grandmother put on makeup here." To be exact, Zhou Mingyu was the one who taught Murphy how to put on makeup. When it came to fashion, whether it was clothes or makeup choices, Murphy could not compare to Zhou Mingyu. While Shishi was taking photos of Nan Xiaoyu, the other girls were excitedly trying out the makeup products. Chen Shiyun and Lu Xiaoyu were the most curious. Lan Xian casually opened a lipstick and applied it on Lu Xiaoyu's hand to let her feel the color. Wow, it's so beautiful. Lu Xiaoyu really liked this kind of shiny pink color. As a result, their exploration of cosmetics went out of control. 10 minutes later, Yu Xiaowei went upstairs and saw this scene. The three girls were not the only ones who put on makeup. Shishi was not spared either. The little girl's forehead was drawn with an eyebrow pencil. Then, she asked Lan Xian to draw 3 whiskers on each side of her face with pink lipstick. Hee. Lu Xiaoyu giggled and said, She, you look like a tiger. No, I'm a cat. A very cute cat. She opened her two paws and played with Lu Xiaoyu, who had put on lipstick and smoky makeup by accident. Of course, the girls had all put on makeup, so how could Nan Zhaoyu be spared? He subconsciously wanted to escape, but in the end, he was pressed onto the dressing table by Chen Shiyun. Chen Shiyun and Lan Xian excitedly carried out a tragic makeup experiment on his face. This powder is good. When we performed in kindergarten, the teacher put it on our faces. I remember. Use this to put it on. Is there any black lipstick? I think black lips look good too, Chen Shiyun muttered. How can there be black lipstick? Lipsticks are all red, Lan Xian said. She listened to their discussion and her eyes lit up. She came over and suggested, I have an idea. We can use this black pen. When Yu Xiaowei came in with Tong Tong, she and the girls were still working on Nan Zhaoyu's face in full swing. However, the scene in front of Yu Xiaowei was enough to make her dumbfounded. What's going on? How long has it been? Why do the girls look like they just came back from a trip to the fairies' cave? Their appearances have all changed. Tong Tong's eyes widened. He didn't react for a moment. If he hadn't been so close to Sister Xiaowei's thigh, he would have run away when he saw these strange people. Sister Xiaowei, come in and play with us. She had been looking at Nan Zhaoyu's appearance and laughing happily. Now that she heard the commotion behind her, she excitedly waved at Yu Xiaowei. For she and the girls, the significance of putting on makeup was nothing more than playing around. Perhaps they didn't even feel like they were putting on makeup. Instead, they felt like they were scribbling. It was just like painting. The makeup was their brushes and paints, and their faces were their natural canvas. What could be more interesting than painting, where they could let their imagination run wild? Of course, Yu Xiaowei was 2 years older than she and the girls, so she faintly felt that it was inappropriate for them to be fooling around like this. However, she wasn't a tough person. When her friends called her, she pursed her lips and joined in. Little brother wants to draw too. Little brother wants to be a kitten like me. She hugged Tong Tong and giggled. Tong Tong carefully looked at his sister in front of him. He finally recognized his sister. When he let out a long sigh of relief, he clapped his hands and chuckled. Oh, how did my sister become like this? Yang Yi was trimming the branches outside. After he replaced his father-in-law, he sped up. After a while, he finished trimming the trees beside the swimming pool and the table tennis table. Mo Henian didn't stay idle either. He swept the cut branches and leaves to one side. Only the front yard was left. Yang Yi asked his father-in-law to go back to the house to rest. Then he planned to call the kids, who had been clamoring to play table tennis since the morning, out to play. However, when he returned to the house, Yang Yi was surprised to find that there was no one in the living room. Chapter 11:10. You guys. What did you do? It wasn't easy for Yang Yi to find someone in the master bedroom. In the end, when he saw these little demons and ghosts, he almost couldn't believe his eyes, including Cici. Were these little guys captured by the demons and released after changing their appearances? Yang Yi originally wanted to scold them, but when he saw the excited and nervous expressions on their colorful faces, he couldn't bring himself to reprimand them. He felt both angry and amused at the same time. In the end, Yang Yi pointed at the little ones, who had all kinds of makeup on their faces, and didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he said, All of you, hey, come out and stand in a row for me to see. After the commotion died down, Cici, Lan Xian, and the others finally realized that they seemed to have gotten into trouble. They lowered their little heads and shuffled to the side with embarrassed expressions on their faces. Since they had to stand in a row, they hoped to stand in a corner, so that they would receive less attention. On the other side were Lu Xiaoyu, Chen Shiyun and Nan Zhaoyu. In the middle was only Yu Xiaowei and Tong Tong, who was quietly hiding beside Sister Xiaowei's legs. Tong Tong also felt that something was wrong. He tried to hide behind a tall sister, thinking that he could avoid his father's sight. However, he didn't expect that they would end up in the middle, and Tong Tong would naturally appear in his father's line of sight. Yang Yi widened his eyes and pointed at Tong Tong, who looked like a little kitten, and said, Hey, you're here too. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Tong Tong also had a few strands of his beard, but perhaps because he felt uncomfortable, Tong Tong unintentionally wiped it. In the end, the color became a mess on his face, and there were lipstick stains on his sleeves. Being laughed at by his father, Tong Tong embarrassingly hid behind Sister Xiaowei and smeared some lipstick stains on Sister Xiaowei's clothes. Yu Xiaowei's expression was the most flustered. She felt that Yang Yi was going to fly into a rage when he asked them to stand in a row. Yu Xiaowei, who was more mature, felt very guilty at this moment. Her eyebrows drooped, and her eyes were red with tears. Yu Xiaowei didn't notice Tong Tong hiding behind her at all. Her heart was in a mess, and she almost burst into tears. Xiaowei, why are you crying? Yang Yi squatted down and rubbed Tong Tong's hair in annoyance and amusement. Just now, he thought that Yu Xiaowei's face was red because she was wearing makeup. Moreover, as soon as he asked this question, Yu Xiaowei sniffled and tears fell from her eyes. Hearing that Yu Xiaowei was crying, Cici and Lan Xian, who were trying their best to hide to the side, no longer cared about themselves. They quickly surrounded Yu Xiaowei and said with concern, "Oh, Sister Xiaowei, don't cry." Fortunately, the current Yu Xiaowei was no longer the Yu Xiaowei that Xixi had just met last year. The Yu Xiaowei was a lot more cheerful and was willing to explain. Uncle Yang." The little girl sobbed and explained. "Don't be angry, okay? I know I was wrong. Please don't stop me from playing with Xixi." It turned out that Yu Xiaowei had been frightened by Yang Yi. "Yang, I didn't do anything." Perhaps because Yu Xiaowei was antisocial when she was young, she didn't like to play with other children. Other adults also thought that she was mentally ill, so they told their children, "Don't play with that Yu Xiaowei." These things had left a deep shadow in her heart. Now Yu Xiaowei was also very scared. She was worried that she would be too naughty this time and make Uncle Yang Yi say such things. Of course, Yang Yi wouldn't do that. He had originally made the little fellows stand in a row, because he wanted to see how much trouble they were causing. At the same time, he wanted to reason with them. But now that he saw Yu Xiaowei so scared, he was too embarrassed to blame them. How could it be? Why wouldn't Uncle let you play with Xixi? Yang Yi smiled and said, "You and Xixi are very good friends." "Yes, Sister Xiaowei and I are very, very good friends." Cici hurriedly nodded at the side. When she saw that Yu Xiaowei was crying, she was also a little worried. The originally cute kitten was now worried and pitiful. She mustered up her courage and said, "Papa, don't be angry with Sister Xiaowei, okay? You can be angry with me. It's my fault. It's also my fault. I used Xixi's grandma's cosmetics first." Lan Xian also stood by her little friend and supported her. She hesitated for a moment, then pouted and said, "Papa Yang, how about you punish me by not allowing me to eat snacks for a week? But don't blame Sister Xiaowei, okay?" These two little girls, they're starting to talk about loyalty? Yang Yi still had a bit of the underworld aura. Of course, he appreciated Xixi and Lan Xian's bravery. However, in order not to let the little guys have too much psychological burden, especially Lu Xiaoyu and Nan Xiaoyu, who were still scared and didn't dare to say a word, Yang Yi smiled and said, "Who said that I want to blame you when I let you stand in a row? Of course, it's still wrong for you to play with other people's cosmetics privately. It's just that this is the first time you've made a mistake, so I forgive you." Yang Yi glanced at the card camera that Xixi put next to him, then smiled and took it. He shook it at them and said proudly, "But since you've already painted your faces like this, you can't let it go to waste, right? Uncle Yang will take a photo of each of you as a souvenir." "Okay. Take a photo? Okay. Xixi saw that her father wasn't angry anymore, so she immediately became happy and rushed to answer. Lan Xian also shouted excitedly, "I want to take a photo too. Papa Yang, take 2 more photos of Xiaoyu." We've painted him the most." Nan Xiaoyu's cheeks were covered in rose-colored blush. This blush was rarely used, because Nan Xiaoyu's cheeks looked like they were floating in the high plains. In addition to the blush, his lips were still black, as if he had eaten something poisonous. The most flirtatious thing was that some little girl suddenly had the idea to paint pink lipstick on his eyebrows and the eyelids under them. Yang Yi couldn't bear to look at this scene. However, Nan Xiaoyu didn't resist. He just scratched his head shyly and whispered, "Uncle Yang, these photos, can you not let my father see them?" Yang Yi held back his laughter and said, "It's okay, I'll take photos for you and save them. When you grow up and don't remember this, I'll show them to you and let you see how you played around in your childhood. I'll let you be happy now, but in the future, you'll be dumbfounded." Yang Yi thought evilly in his heart. "Papa, do you want to take photos for little brother?" Obviously, Shishi's attention wasn't here at the moment, so she asked curiously. "Of course, how can I leave Momo behind?" Yang Yi laughed. "Then, I want to redraw little brother's face. His face was erased, so it doesn't look good." Shishi looked at her father with pleading eyes and said, "Papa, give us a little more time, okay?" "Of course, do as you please." Yang Yi generously waved his hand and said cheerfully. Tong Tong blinked innocently. His little hand was still holding Sister Xiaowei's clothes. Yu Xiaowei had stopped sobbing. When she heard that Uncle Yang didn't blame her, she felt that the atmosphere among her friends had become warm again. She was happy and touched, so she pursed her lips and smiled. In the evening, the children who had washed off their faces were taken home by their parents, while Yang Yi was at home, being chased by the flustered and exasperated Murphy. No, honey, listen to me. The situation was out of control at that time. When I saw their faces were red from the makeup, I was dumbfounded, so how could I stop them in time?" Yang Yi chuckled as she ran for her life. "But don't worry, I've already left evidence. When they grow up in the future, you can take these photos to them. Tell them, quickly compensate Auntie for her cosmetics. You're still quibbling, you must have a part in it too." Murphy angrily chased after him and angrily said, "Last time in the TV station's lounge, who was the one who broke several of my lipsticks?" Cough cough, it's such a long time ago, why are you still bringing it up?" Yang Yi dryly laughed. "Humph, Yang Yi, you're a man with a criminal record, I don't believe your nonsense at all. You're framing the children, Shishi is fine, but you're framing Momo. I don't believe it. I'm innocent. Ah. Chapter 11:11. Murphy's concert at Baobei Station had been closely watched by the media for almost half a month. If it was just a normal concert, even if Murphy was the most popular diva in the Chinese music industry, it would still be difficult to attract the media's attention. However, according to the venue in Taiwan, Yang Yi had spent a lot of money to set up special effects that were comparable to the Spring Festival Gala for this concert. In addition, Taiwan was Mo Fei's hometown, so this situation was not a secret. Naturally, the media was very curious about what kind of tricks Yang Yi would play in this concert. In addition to the equipment at the venue, there were also many interesting news reports. For example, the 6 people of the Limit Challenge had already arrived in Baodao. In addition to recording a special episode, their agent also revealed that the 6 people of the Limit Challenge, including Yang Huan and Zhu Jie, would be attending Mo Fei's Baobei Station concert as special guests. Another example was that a reporter had received an affirmative answer from Chen Yijie. "I received an invitation, so of course I will attend. I will attend all 3 events." In addition to Chen Yijie, there were also Taiwanese singers Qin Yu, who had gained a new lease of life through I Am a Singer, and Yang Yi's own group of folk singers, Thousand Miles Creek Tree, who were currently popular with folk music fans. They all announced their itineraries on micro-broadcasting. "See you at Baobei." Obviously, this was a very high-standard concert. Not only were the Taiwanese fans excited, but the other fans who had gotten tickets to this concert also couldn't wait to book tickets to Taiwanese. They even expanded their itinerary to include sightseeing and food. After all, Taiwanese was famous for its tourism resources. Just like before, on Friday afternoon, after Shishi and Lan Xian finished school, Yang Yi picked up the 2 girls. They didn't need to go home, so they left Wuhu District directly and went to the airport in Binhai District to meet up with Murphy, Tong Tong, and the 2 elders. This time, Murphy went with the big group because the concert was scheduled for next Monday. In fact, Monday to Wednesday was the Dragon Boat Festival holiday. With the 2-day weekend, this short holiday was enough for many fans to arrange their itineraries. Of course, since Murphy was leaving now, there was enough time for her to arrange the rehearsals for the concert. Taking a plane was nothing special. After all, It took less than 2 hours to fly from Jiangqing to Baobei. It was much more comfortable than flying from Jiangqing to Chengdu. This time, Tong didn't feel sleepy when she got off the plane. She was in her mother's arms and she looked around energetically at the fans and reporters who came to pick her up. It was so lively. Outside the airport, it was simply a sea of people. Little Momo was curious and nervous as she lay in her mother's arms. She didn't dare to move, but her round eyes kept moving around and looking around. Taiwan was Murphy's hometown after all. The number of fans who came to pick her up was several times larger than the number who came to pick her up in Chengdu. The local police had already been dispatched to maintain order. However, it had to be said that although there were a lot of fans outside the airport, they were all very well-mannered. They did not crowd out through the passage that was guarded by the police. They just stood where they were and happily held up the flags, slogans, and even lit up support signs that they had prepared. The words on the signs were quite interesting. Murphy, welcome home. Murphy, you are the pride of Taiwan's children. Yang Yi, Treasure Island's son-in-law, multi-talented, we love you. This big slogan even had rhymes. Unfortunately, they just held it up and didn't shout it out. There were also support signs with Shishi and Tong Tong's names. It seemed like these were really hardcore fans. When Murphy saw this scene, she was so touched that she couldn't help but cover her mouth with one hand. Her eyes were glistening with tears. When she was young, she used to come back to Taiwan during the holidays. However, after she debuted, she was very busy with work. Moreover, Taiwan's entertainment industry was leaning towards China, so she rarely came back to her hometown. She really didn't expect that her hometown fans would prepare such a big welcome ceremony for her. When Yang Yi saw this, he let the two elders hold on to Shishi and Lan Xian while he took over Tong Tong. He wanted to give Murphy some space to thank her fans. However, they didn't expect that the surprise wasn't just limited to these slogans. Before Murphy walked up to say something, someone in the line of fans suddenly shouted, 3, 2, 1. After the countdown ended, hundreds of fans sang Murphy's song in unison. For you, I used half a year's savings to cross the ocean to see you. This song was written by Yang Yi for Murphy. It could be considered one of her famous songs, so it was very appropriate to use it here. In an instant, Murphy, Yang Yi, and Zhou Mingyu, who were behind her, were all touched. Thank you everyone. Murphy smiled as she wiped away her tears. She wasn't good with words, so she didn't know how to thank them. She could only bow gently and say, "Thank you for your constant support. In the future, I will definitely come back often. If there is a chance, I will continue to hold concerts in Taiwan." As it was inconvenient to bring the children and elders, Yang Yi and Murphy thanked their fans and got into the nanny van driven by the bodyguards. The nanny van slowly drove out of the airport. The fans behind them didn't disperse for a long time. Returning home in glory, this is how it should be. Earlier, Mo Henian didn't say a word and solemnly acted like a family head. However, when he got into the car and the windows were slowly closed, he couldn't help but sigh. Old Master Mo had a big farm in America and was considered a successful person in his hometown. However, when compared to the attention that Murphy received when she came back, the difference was obvious. "Papa, how is this returning home in glory? I'm just here to hold a concert." Mo Fei shook her head and said honestly, "I'm not here to show off in front of the villagers." Mo Henian was fuming, but before he could say anything, Zhou Mingyu pulled Murphy's hand and said with a smile, "Just let him show off for a while. This person is usually very prideful. It's rare to have a chance to show off, so of course he has to grab it." "How am I showing off?" Mo Henian said resentfully. "When am I prideful? You don't understand." This time, they didn't have to stay in a hotel. Mo Henian had an ancestral house in Baobei. Although it looked old, more than 10 years ago, Mo Henian had made some money from his farm in America and had come back to renovate it. However, although the renovations were done by others, the interior design and structure of the house and yard were all done by Mo Henian himself. With his architectural design ability, his old profession, this small courtyard was also a unique place. Moreover, as they planned to come back to live in these few days, Mo Henian had asked his relatives to come over and help clean and tidy up the house. Therefore, as far as the eye could see, The house was clean and the yard was like a garden, with green plants and paths complementing each other beautifully. Lon Excian, who was picky, couldn't stop praising. Wow, what a beautiful house. Excian Air, can I stay in the same room as you? Cece's footsteps were light as she ran ahead excitedly. After looking around, she ran back and said while blinking her big bright eyes, I saw a room with a bed next to the window, and there were many books on the wall. Okay. Lon Excian agreed. She believed in Shishi's taste, and the little girl also liked to stay with Shishi, so that they could whisper for a while at night. Yang Yi followed them to take a look and found that it was a combination of a study and a bedroom. The space was not very big, but the layout was relatively clean and tidy. Moreover, outside the transparent window was a beautiful small courtyard. Now that the lights illuminated the whole courtyard, it looked really beautiful. You want to sleep here? Yang Yi still felt that this place was a little small, so he said with a smile. You can sleep in the bedroom inside. This bed is a little small. Of course, it could still accommodate the two little girls. Yang Yi was just worried that the degree of comfort was not as good as a real bedroom. Oh no, Papa, I like this room. There are so many books. Papa, I like to read. Shishi pouted and shook her little head. Perhaps this was called each flower in each eye? As soon as Shishi arrived, she felt that this room was suitable for her, so naturally, she was not willing to change. Yang Yi could not persuade Shishi and Lon Excian, who agreed with Shishi, so he had to go to the bedroom and bring in a softer bed, quilt, and pillows for Shishi and the others to change. How could Yang Yi bear to let his daughters sleep on this kind of simple bed that was not meant for people to live in? After Murphy bathed the two little girls, Yang Yi came to visit again. Seeing that the two of them were laughing and playing together on the bed, and were not afraid of the strange environment at all, he was relieved. Turn off the light and go to bed early. Yang Yi reminded them, and then went back to his and Murphy's room. Chapter 11-12. Mo Fei and Yang Yi were still the busiest when they were traveling with 3 children and 2 elderly people, even if they were accompanied by assistants and bodyguards. After returning to the Mo family's ancestral home, Murphy and Yang Yi worked around the clock. They bathed the 3 children, coaxed Tong Tong to sleep, packed the luggage, hung up the clothes they brought, and many other chores. The assistants and bodyguards were arranged to stay in a nearby hotel. They were not so pretentious as to stay in their own house with a personal assistant, so they had to do these things themselves. After Yang Yi came back from visiting Shishi and Lon Excian, Murphy was finally free to rest on the sofa in the bedroom. However, Yang Yi saw that she was still very energetic. It seemed that her excitement of returning to her hometown and touching the familiar furniture had not subsided. Why are you so happy? Yang Yi sat down beside Murphy and asked with a smile. Because I suddenly remembered a lot of memories when I returned to my hometown. Murphy said softly with a smile in her eyes. Didn't you say that after your debut, you rarely came back to Baobei? Yang Yi asked curiously. Yes, after my debut. I was busy with work and did not come back for a few years. After Shishi was born, I did not bring her back either. At that time, she was too young and I did not want to take her everywhere. Murphy said with emotion. However, when I was young, every spring festival or when my father was on vacation, we would come back to Baobei to visit our relatives. So, I left a lot of memories here. Yang Yi remembered that Murphy had said that she was very cheerful when she was young. However, she had been treated unfairly in the entertainment industry in Harbor City, so her personality gradually became cold. So, Yang Yi smiled and said, When you were young? That must be very interesting memories. Murphy reached out and intertwined her fingers with Yang Yi's. Her eyes were filled with memories as she shared with Yang Yi. Yes. At that time, our ancestral home had not been renovated yet. It was an old house that had been there for decades. My grandmother was still alive at that time. She lived in the room that my father and mom were sleeping in tonight. Speaking of her grandmother who had passed away, Mo Fei was a little sad, and the fatigue in her body also came up. Yang Yi felt sorry for his wife, so he reached out and put his arm around her shoulders. Murphy lay in Yang Yi's arms. She was used to this. She found the most comfortable pillow position on Yang Yi's thick chest. Then she raised her head and smiled softly at Yang Yi. Mo Fei continued, pointing at the ceiling with her finger. Then the room we are sleeping in now is still the room that was left for me before, but it was not so big before. Later, my papa redesigned it and combined the two small rooms, mine and my cousin's room, into this big bedroom. Murphy had told Yang Yi about the Murphy family before. After her grandmother passed away, the ancestral home was left to Mo Henian, and the family factory was left to Murphy's uncles. Later, the development of the manufacturing industry in Baobei was not good, so they moved the factory to the mainland. At present, Murphy's uncles also lived in the mainland. What about the furniture? Is it the old furniture? Yang Yi pointed to the cabinet and the big bed in the middle and asked. After hearing Yang Yi's question, Murphy was a little surprised and said, "Yes, how did you know? The cabinet used to be in my room, and the bed was made when my papa and mama got married. It's a very solid wooden bed. My papa felt that it was a pity to change it, so he kept it." Yang Yi smiled and said, "I can see that. These pieces of furniture look old. They don't fit in with the design of your father's house. Compared to them, the other pieces of furniture are much more harmonious." It was past 11 o'clock in the evening, but the two were not sleepy. Instead, the more they talked, the more energetic they became. They snuggled together on the sofa and continued to talk about Murphy's childhood. Mo Fei's memory wasn't as good as Yang Yi's. She only remembered a lot of things from her childhood after coming here. "Actually, when I was young, I was not as obedient as she. Murphy smiled embarrassedly and said, "At that time, when we came back to Baobei in the summer, I did something that almost made my father anxious." "What was it?" Yang Yi asked in surprise. "My cousin is much older than me. Then he and a neighbor's brother, I forgot to call him Awei, or Awei's brother, liked motorcycles very much. Motorcycles are banned in Jiangcheng." Murphy was worried that Yang Yi would not understand, so she explained, "But there are no motorcycles that big. Baobei is more crowded, so most of the motorcycles people use are small women's motorcycles." "Yes, I know." Yang Yi smiled and nodded. He had seen it in the movies. "One night, I heard them say that they were going to take a motorbike to Keelung to watch the sunrise. Then I ran over and asked them if they could take me along." Murphy smiled embarrassedly and said, "I was only 5 or 6 years old at that time, so I didn't know much. I simply thought that my cousins were very awesome, so I often followed behind them. Going to Keelung to watch the sunrise was the coolest thing they did, so I wanted to follow them even more." "And then? You went to Keelung with your cousin and brother Wei?" Yang Yi asked, his tone a little jealous. Some people said that husband and wife looked more and more alike, and Yang Yi was the same. After living with Mo Fei for so many years, although they didn't look more and more alike, their personalities had become a lot more similar. No, they looked exactly the same when they were jealous. Murphy could naturally tell. She smiled and said, Don't be jealous. I rode on my cousin's motorbike and brother Wei drove his own. Plus, my cousins were all older than me by more than 10 years. Let me tell you, at that time, I was also I didn't know how crazy I was. I left in the middle of the night, then went to Keelung early in the morning to watch the sunrise. On the way back, I bumped into my dad and uncle, and they came over in a car. Yang Yi could not help but feel jealous. He complained, "You're too bold, running out in the middle of the night when you're only 5 or 6 years old." "Okay, don't be angry. I know I was wrong." Murphy saw this and immediately sat up, holding Yang Yi's hand pitifully. However, before the two of them had time to talk about this matter clearly, there was a knock on the door of the room. What was it? Yang Yi and Mo Fei both stood up in confusion and opened the door to take a look. Lan Xian, who was wearing pajamas, was standing barefoot on the wooden floor outside. The little girl looked scared and trembled as she stood outside. "Daddy Yang, sob, I'm scared. I don't dare to sleep." When the door opened, Lan Xian could not wait to jump into Yang Yi's arms. Her body was still trembling as she cried, "Window, it's too scary outside the window." Chapter 11:13. Yang Yi picked up Lan Xian and coaxed her for a while before he figured out what had happened. It turned out that when they were sleeping, Old Master Mo turned off the lights in the yard. All of a sudden, it seemed that the whole world had become dark and quiet. Lan Xian was not like Shishi, who slept peacefully and punctually. She was still squinting and tossing in bed, thinking about what to eat tomorrow. I think there's a monster outside the window. It's very, very dark. Lan Xian pouted and complained. The little girl looked out of the floor-to-ceiling window beside the bed. It was a dark courtyard, and the bushes were hidden in the shadows of the trees. It was as if there was a beast lurking in the dark. Although she couldn't see it, Lan Xian could already imagine the monster's ferocious appearance. What about Shishi? Is she scared too? Murphy asked with a smile. She and Yang Yi were not very worried. After all, this was just a child's silly imagination, who had not been afraid of ghosts when they were young. Yes, Shishi is still here. I called her, but she fell asleep and ignored me. Lan Xian also thought of Shishi at this moment. She muttered and suddenly realized something and became anxious. Papa Yang, hurry up and save Shishi. She's going to be taken away by the monster. It's okay, it's okay. Yang Yi didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he comforted Lan Xian and brought her back to the study where the two little girls were sleeping. He pointed outside the window and said with a smile, "There's no demon there. Aren't they all the trees you saw before? They just turned off the lights." Shishi was sleeping soundly on the bed. She did not respond even when the lights were turned on in the room. When Yang Yi came in, he saw the little girl sleeping soundly. She had kicked the small quilt to one side and squeezed it with the quilt Lan Xian had pushed away before coming out. After turning on the light, Lan Xian let out a sigh of relief, but she still muttered with lingering fear, "But I'm scared. Why don't we change rooms tonight?" Yang Yi smiled and said, "Uncle has an empty room next door. When you sleep, you don't have to look at the courtyard. What do you think?" "What about Shishi? We can't leave Shishi here." Lan Xian calmed down and was still concerned about her little friend. She said exaggeratedly, "If Shishi stays here, she will be taken away by the monsters. Shishi is not Tang Sanzang. Why would a monster like her?" Yang Yi smiled. He remembered that when Lan Xian was in kindergarten with Shishi, she had heard a lot of stories from Yang Yi's journey to the west. She didn't remember anything except those gods, demons, and monsters. Of course, since he was going to change rooms for Lan Xian in the middle of the night, Yang Yi also wanted to change rooms for Shishi. It just so happened that the room next to Yang Yi's was bigger and more comfortable than the study, so there was no need for the two little girls to squeeze on a small bed. When he moved the beds for them, Lan Xian yawned. However, since she didn't sleep in the middle of the night, she was still quite energetic. In order to help her father, the little girl hugged her small pillow and followed behind Yang Yi. Then, she followed Yang Yi to pick up Shishi. It was obvious that she didn't have a sense of security in her heart from the way she kept following them. Shishi really slept like a slender little white pig. When Yang Yi returned to the study and carried her to the bedroom, the little girl didn't wake up. She just murmured and then twisted her body in her father's arms to find a comfortable position. She continued to bury her head in her father's chest and slept soundly. "Father Yang, can I sleep with the lights on?" Lan Xian climbed onto the bed and pulled the small quilt to cover her legs. Then she looked at Yang Yi and asked, "Sleeping with the lights on will affect the quality of your sleep?" Yang Yi thought for a moment and smiled gently. "How about this? I'll stay with you for a while. After you fall asleep, I'll go back to sleep, okay?" Lan Xian's tense little face finally relaxed at this moment. She nodded happily. Yes. That night, there were no more twists and turns. Lan Xian was already a little sleepy. Yang Yi watched for a while and finally fell asleep. They slept all the way until dawn. The next morning, Shishi was woken up by her father. The little girl was like a little koala. She hugged her father's neck lazily and didn't want to come down. When she rubbed her sleepy eyes and regained some energy, she realized that something was wrong. Why am I here?" The little girl's voice was a little nasal. She asked in confusion. "Shishi, you don't know. It was dangerous last night. After the lights were turned off, there was a monster." Lan Xian was still lazing around in bed. She grabbed the small quilt and refused to get up. However, after hearing Shishi's question, she couldn't help it. She turned over and got up. She shouted at Shishi, "There was a monster?" Shishi looked at her little friend in surprise. "Yes. It was very scary. You were almost taken away." Lan Xian threatened in a menacing manner. "I'm not afraid. My papa is super powerful. He can beat a monster." Shishi pouted and said indifferently. Looking at Shishi's exultant performance, Lan Xian was a little surprised. She wasn't even afraid of a monster? How would Lan Xian know? In Shishi's heart, her father was an existence comparable to Ultraman and Sun Wukong. What was a little monster? No bad guy could be her father's opponent. This was just a small episode. On Saturday and Sunday, Yang Yi was still busy. In the morning, he would take Shishi, Lan Xian, and Tong Tong to visit several famous scenic spots in Baobei City. In the afternoon, he needed to go to the stadium to participate in the group rehearsal with Murphy. After all, the concert this time was very grand. Not only did they invite a lot of guests, but they also used some lighting technology at the scene. In order to make the concert look more exquisite and interesting, it was necessary to do a walkthrough before the start of the concert. The program in the evening was much more exciting. After Murphy and Yang Yi came out of the stadium, they didn't eat dinner. Instead, they took the three little guys to visit several famous night markets in Baobei City. Every night market had its own characteristics. However, no matter which night market it was, they could almost find all the special food and snacks of Baobei, and even food from all over the world. Obviously, this catered to Lan Xian's appetite. Every night, the little girl would eat until her stomach was full. She would even take a walk to digest her food. Then she would eat until she was full. Then she would leave with Yang Yi and Tong Tong. Don't think that Yang Yi and Tong Tong could easily hide their identities in the crowded night market. With Murphy's fame in Baobei City, when they entered the night market, they were surrounded by a lot of surprised fans. Luckily, Yang Yi had brought enough bodyguards, and the fans, who were local or tourists, were understanding of Yang Yi and Tong Tong. They just smiled and watched, and secretly took out their mobile phones to take pictures. They didn't make any noise and ruin the mood of Yang Yi, Murphy, and the other children. However, the next day, all the major local media in Baobei, and even many tabloids in the entertainment industry, reported the news of Yang Yi and Murphy's appearance in the night market in Baobei City. Interestingly, they didn't find a topic that could attract the attention of the audience. Many reports even reported on what Yang Yi and Murphy ate with the children. You might not believe it, but Yang Yi and Murphy tore up squid on the street. The most down-to-earth star and billionaire, Yang Yi and Murphy ate shaved ice in Baobei City's night market. Where to Baobei? Yang Yi and Murphy tell you the answer. Chapter 11-14. In Baobei City, the night market was Lan Xian's favorite, and Shishi and Tong Tong praised it. However, in terms of favorite, Shishi and Tong Tong would still choose Huashan Cultural and Creative Park. Even if the food in the night market was not included, Lan Xian also liked the cartoon art exhibitions and creative shops in the park. It was the kind of wonderful place that the three children would never want to leave. However, when it came to this place, Yang Yi heard about it from a tourist fan who was eating shaved ice with them in the night market. "Yang Yi, Murphy, you brought your children here for a trip. You must go to Huashan Cultural and Creative Park to play. There are all kinds of art exhibitions there. I went there yesterday, and there is a cartoon art exhibition that is very suitable for children." When the fan saw that Yang Yi and Murphy were very easygoing, she let go of her reservations and excitedly introduced them to the park. Cartoon art exhibition? Huashan Cultural and Creative Park? Murphy was not familiar with this place. After all, it was built in recent years. After Yang Yi went back home that night, he and Murphy looked it up on the internet. Just looking at the photos and the unique and very artistic buildings and decorations, they were immediately interested. This was a unique scenic spot in the modern era. It seemed to be much more interesting than ordinary tourist attractions. Therefore, on Sunday morning, Yang Yi and Murphy brought the three children to this wonderful place. "This place is very suitable for taking photos," Murphy exclaimed in surprise when she saw the row of old-fashioned bungalows and the preserved winery ruins. especially the row of green walls covered with creepers outside the row of small factories. She also looked around with interest. Suddenly, she found something and happily pulled her father's hand, wanting to drag him away. Papa, look, there is a little person wearing a yellow hat. Let's go and take a look, okay? Wasn't that right? It should be a bookstore that was set up in an old house. The bushes at the door were neatly trimmed. From the front, it looked like the small trees were painted on the wall. What was more interesting was that inside the old lattice windows, there were blue and yellow leaf stickers, which contrasted nicely with the bushes and small trees outside. She liked the figure sculpture sitting next to a small potted tree. It was a sculpture of a little boy about the size of a normal person, with a yellow hat, yellow gloves, and yellow snow boots. This color was in sharp contrast to the blue shirt and pants, as well as the green scarf. Of course, it was also holding a book with a red cover and sitting on a big black rock, also a sculpture. The small tree next to it was like an open umbrella, sheltering him from the rain and the sun. The sculpture of the little boy was quite a few meters tall. Although it looked chubby and silly, the sharp contrast of these lively colors gave it a particularly eye-catching vitality. No wonder she liked it. Murphy had just finished modeling in front of the Boston Ivy, and happily wanted Yang-yi to take a photo of her. In the end, she turned around and saw her daughter pulling her husband away. Yang Xiaoxi, you have to abide by the principle of first come, first served. Murphy said angrily. How can you cut the queue? Papa wants to take a photo of me first. Cece obediently stopped and giggled at her mother. She shook her little but a little embarrassedly and said, I didn't cut in line. Hee mama, come and take a look too. That little person is so cute. I don't want to look, Don't you think it looks better here? This red bus shop is in front of the Boston Ivy. Red with green, how stylish. Murphy argued with her daughter very seriously. Yang-yi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He put Tong Tong down and let Lan Xian and she each hold Tong Tong with one hand. Then he took out a SLR camera from his backpack and said with a smile, Okay, don't quarrel one by one. Everyone has a share. They didn't just take photos here, they also bought a lot of things. For example, in the bookstore behind the little person that she mentioned just now, Yang-yi bought a few storybooks written by Taiwanese writers for Shi. Then they went to a store that specialized in selling vinyl records that had already retired from the stage of history. Murphy was also attracted by these very artistic shop designs and the beautifully packaged vinyl records. Although they weren't particularly famous international vinyl records, they were just music works by some Taiwanese artists, and there were even many ethnic classical songs. As the store manager said when they were chatting, this store didn't sell high-quality products, but a kind of ancient lifestyle. It sold a special, leisurely lifestyle. Therefore, Yang-yi and Murphy happily jumped on a few wooden vinyl records and prepared to take them back to Jiangqing to enjoy. Of course, Yang-yi didn't need to take anything. Today, he went out with a few bodyguards as usual. After buying something, he asked the bodyguards to send it directly to their car. They could take it with them when they went back. Finally, after visiting N creative stores, Yang-yi and Murphy accidentally came to the art exhibition hall and saw the cartoon art exhibition that they had long forgotten. It was really a cartoon art exhibition. When Yang-yi and the rest entered, they saw many cartoon figures that they often saw on TV. Whoosh! Qiao Qiao Hu! Cece and Lan Xian were even more excited. The two little girls had even forgotten their image as they screamed and yelled excitedly. Tong Tong also recognized these. After all, he often watched TV with his sister. Although the little guy didn't shout, he was still affected by his sister's emotions. He excitedly clapped his little hands in his father's arms. The exhibition hall here wasn't like some car shows or merchandise exhibitions, where the goods were only displayed for people to observe. The reason why it could win the children's favor was because it had been cleverly designed. For example, the Qiao Qiao exhibition hall that Shi mentioned had wooden wall stickers, grass-like carpets, and pillars in the middle that looked like a big tree. There were also lifelike plastic branches and leaves extending from the pillars. These were all highly similar to the scenes in cartoons. It was like an extremely miniaturized version of an amusement park, giving the children a wonderful immersive experience. It was no wonder that Cece and Lon Excian couldn't help but pounce on them when they saw them. They giggled and sat together with the three big dumb bears, and even beckoned little Tao Wu to come over and take photos with them. Not only that, even Shishi was dazzled. Yang Yi had just taken 2 pictures of them when the little girl couldn't hold back anymore. She ran to the wooden toy exhibition area in front of them, and hugged a magic rabbit that was completely made of wood. It poked its head out from a gentleman's hat, and didn't want to let go. This one can even play. Lon Excian touched a small wooden Ferris wheel toy, which actually produced a series of beautiful music. She exclaimed in surprise and asked Shishi to take a look. Hey, it's real. It looks like a music box. I also have a music box toy at home. Shishi hugged the magic rabbit, and went over to take a look. She analyzed it with Lon Excian. Not to mention Shishi and Lon Excian. Even Murphy was captivated by the beautiful and exquisite wooden dolls and toys. She held Tong Tong in one hand and picked up a wooden deer in the other. She smiled and showed it to Yang Yi. Look at this, it's so cute. It was as if at this moment, Murphy had also returned to her teenage years. Her little starry eyes were as happy as Shishi's. However, there was a problem. There were so many wonderful wooden toys. Were they going to buy them all? Yang Yi felt that he couldn't bring so many, but looking at the little girls, they were unwilling to put down their favorite wooden toys. Chapter 11:15. This is quite suitable for you to play with. Yang Yi and the others had not only seen many wooden dolls in the shape of animals, but also many wooden toys, such as the Ferris wheel wooden music box that Lon Excian and Shishi had found earlier, and a small wooden toy that Murphy had found called the ball-knocking box. Murphy smiled as if she was presenting a treasure. She beckoned Yang Yi over with Tong Tong in her arms. Look, there are wooden balls of different sizes and colors. The different holes in the box correspond to different wooden balls. You have to put them in the right place before you can knock them in. She even showed Yang Yi how to do it. Murphy picked up a small blue ball, found the right hole on the board and put it in. The middle of the hole was wrapped in a circle of rubber, and had a strong sense of damping. Obviously, it would be difficult to force it in. Murphy's curved eyes had a charming smile. She raised a well-polished small mallet next to her, and knocked the blue ball in little by little, as if she was playing whack-a-mole. Plop! The sound of the ball falling into the wooden box was dull, but pleasant to the ears. Tong Tong's eyes were wide open. He was stunned by his mother's operation in his father's arms. Look. It's fun, isn't it? Murphy proudly gestured with the small mallet in her hand to Yang Yi. Yang Yi just smiled. Tong Tong enthusiastically stretched out his little hand, and asked his mother for the small mallet. He grinned happily and said in a childish voice, Mom, I want to play. At this time, Cece ran over and tugged at her father's clothes excitedly. Papa, come and take a look. Yang Yi was a little busy, so he had to let Murphy play with Tong Tong while he followed Shishi to see her new discovery. The little girl found a cartoon puppet of a big-eared monkey. However, it was different from ordinary puppets. Its style was a bit like Meng Chi-Chi's. It had big ears and claws like a small animal, but its body was upright and anthropomorphic. Moreover, its face was made to look like a child's. It had short eyebrows, big eyes, a small nose and a cheerful smile. If one only looked at its face, it had a kind of adorable look that made people want to dote on it. Note: based on Big Ear's Chabu from Russia. If you include its big ears, then this big-eared monkey would be even cuter. This was because other than its human-like face, its brown fur made it look more like a little doll wearing a one-piece nightgown with big ears. The combination of the furry doll and the puppet naturally attracted Cece's attention at once. Papa, look, isn't it super cute? Shishi pulled her father over. Her big watery eyes looked at her father with anticipation as she said excitedly and nervously. Yang Yi could of course understand. Although the little girl didn't say it directly, her meaning was, Papa, such a cute big-eared monkey. Let's bring it home, okay? Lon Excian helped Shishi hold the magic rabbit she wanted before, but she didn't want to be left out. She giggled and interrupted. Shishi, look, there's more. The big-eared monkey is holding an apple in its hand. I thought it was a real apple just now. And then I took a look at it, only to find that it was also a piece of wood. It really looks like an apple, and it's a super beautiful red apple. Hee 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 hee. Really? Wow. She exclaimed. Yang Yi looked at his daughter, and then looked at Murphy, who was trying all kinds of wooden toys suitable for children with Tong Tong. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry and said, She, this big-eared monkey is a bit too big. It's not easy to buy it and bring it home. Does that mean we can't buy it? Shishi's cute little face suddenly became tangled. She slightly pouted her little mouth, grabbed her father's finger, and shook it back and forth. She muttered, but, she couldn't think of any reason to persuade her father to buy her this super cute big-eared monkey. But at this time Yang Yi smiled, waved his right hand and said boldly, but this time is an exception. Even if it's troublesome to bring it home, we'll find a way to buy it. He couldn't help it. After all, he also admired the design of these wooden arts. After all, the whole family showed such a fanatical attitude. Even if he didn't buy it for Shishi, Murphy would buy a lot of wooden toys for Tong Tong to play at home. Yang Yi couldn't favor one and discriminate against the other, right? So he might as well be willful this time. Bye. Yang Yi said generously, Exionaire, do you like anything? Pick a few. It's rare for you to come out, so buy some small gifts for your parents. Not to mention Lan Exion's reaction. Shishi's face was already full of surprise. After she confirmed that her father wasn't lying, her pretty little face bloomed with a sweet smile. She happily held her father's hand and excitedly jumped up. Papa, you're so good. Hee hee, I know you're the best papa, and you love me the most. When was the last time Shishi was so happy? Yang Yi looked at the little girl's joyful jumping and couldn't help but laugh softly. Before going to the rehearsal in the stadium, Yang Yi, Murphy, and the three children spent their lunchtime in a very unique themed restaurant. There wasn't much to say about the cakes and drinks in this restaurant, because in terms of taste, Yang Yi could make more delicious baked cakes and make more delicious fruit milk tea. But the interesting thing about this restaurant was that it had a very beautiful theme. The paint on the walls and floor were either red with white dots on a red background, or white with red dots on a white background. The dots of different sizes created a special starry sky feeling. Of course, it was a color that made people's eyes light up with red and white colors. Not only the decorations on the walls and floor, but the tables and plastic seats were all adorned with a very cute white background and red dots. In this restaurant, Shishi, Tong Tong, and Murphy all showed a strong interest. After all, women tended to like bright and cute colors. It was necessary to mention the cake here. Although Lan Xian didn't think it was that delicious, she also thought that the cake was very beautiful. The layer of white cheese on the surface was also decorated with round dots of strawberry juice. It looked like it matched the restaurant's theme. Of course, the taste was ordinary. After the children were full, they didn't show much interest. Instead, they took out the wooden toys that they had just bought and played with Tong Tong. Yang Yi and Murphy sat at the side and chatted leisurely. They were resting their legs after walking for the whole morning. Do you know what I was thinking when I made my comeback in the past? If I failed again and again and couldn't sing anymore, what would I do? Murphy asked Yang Yi with a smile. They really hadn't talked about this topic before. After all, they were all looking forward to a bright future. Why would they look back and think about their past failures? What would you do? Yang Yi asked curiously. Go back to America? No, I mean that I slowly started to accept your thoughts during that time period. Guess what I was thinking at that time? Take a guess. Mo Fei laughed. It's not easy to guess, but I don't think you would become a music teacher. I don't think you have the personality to be a music teacher. Yang Yi smiled bitterly and shook his head. He said, I really can't guess. I don't know what else you can do besides singing. I know how to arrange flowers. Don't think that I'm stupid. I don't know anything, okay? Murphy pouted and said angrily. Oh right. Flower arranging. You're the best at arranging flowers. Yang Yi laughed. Murphy nodded her head in satisfaction. She giggled and said, I won't keep you in suspense. I'll tell you. If I really can't sing anymore, I hope to open a flower arrangement shop next to your coffee shop, not a flower shop. I'm not selling these flowers. I'm making them for everyone to see. Then, the customers can pay for them to make their own flower arrangements. I'll provide them with the raw materials and give them some guidance. That's a good idea. It sounds wonderful. Yang Yi gave Murphy a thumbs up and praised her. Actually, Murphy's idea did not have any business sense at all. She had never considered the profits of this shop. She was relying on the customers to make money by making their own DIY arrangements. Not many people would have the time to do this. Most of the boys who wanted to be romantic were only willing to spend money to buy ready-made bouquets. Moreover, in the material age, intentions were not worth much. No matter how meticulous the DIY was, it would only be a few lonely flowers. It would not be as effective as a big bouquet of red roses. So Murphy's idea was not realistic. But what did it matter? Why would Yang Yi need Murphy to make money? If she wanted to open a flower arrangement shop, she just needed to make some artistic flower arrangements for others to see. Yang Yi would also support her unconditionally. After receiving Yang Yi's praise, Murphy pursed her lips. Her beautiful eyes were shining with joy. She smiled sweetly and said, "Also, I think that the best thing would be for our two shops to be next to each other. You open a coffee shop, and I'll open a flower arrangement shop. Just like Grandpa Hu and Grandma Hu, one opening a bookstore, and the other planting flowers outside. How romantic would that be?" Yang Yi saw a strong yearning in Murphy's eyes. In fact, Yang Yi understood that Murphy did not yearn for the so-called flower arrangement shop. What she wanted more was old Master Hu Songnan and his wife's love that lasted for decades. Back then, when Yang Yi and Murphy were still living in the coffee shop's small building, didn't Murphy, who didn't feel very safe, often pester Yang Yi to tell her the story of old Master Hu? Yang Yi reached out and grabbed Murphy's soft hand. He held it gently and said gently, "Believe me, there will be." Chapter 11:16. Mommy, come on, don't run. Let me see if you'll look more handsome in a vest, or just wear a scarf. On Monday afternoon, at the Mo family's ancestral home, Zhou Mingyu was carrying a small black vest in one hand and a gray and white towel in the other. She was smiling as she followed the energetic Tong Tong. Little Momo had already been dressed up handsomely by his grandmother. He wore a pair of dark blue jeans with wrinkles and a white long-sleeved t-shirt. Moreover, the sleeves were rolled up slightly. Not only did he not look bloated, but he also looked extra energetic. After all, their grandmother, who had a good eye for fashion, had personally dressed them up. If little mommy were to put on a vest, tuck her hair, and put on a pair of sunglasses, she would definitely be a charming little hot pot. "Grandma, I'll help you catch little brother." Hee hee. Shishi's cheerful laughter came from the side. Looking towards the source of the sound, a little princess who seemed to have accidentally entered the human world appeared in front of the camera. Shishi had also been dressed up by Grandma. She was wearing a dreamy white lace gauze dress. The main body of the dress was made of many layers of yarn, with flower embroidery and pearl decorations. This wasn't very special since many princess dresses were exquisite and beautiful. The best finishing touch was its long shawl mesh design. The little girl's fair and slender arms were exposed from her shoulders, shrouded in this dreamy and misty mesh. All of a sudden, the style was enhanced by a lot. It was as if a commoner princess had evolved into an exquisite princess of the royal family. Of course, Shishi's slender figure and delicate little face were the real reasons why she looked so fairy-like and elegant in this dress. Which family's little girl could have such fair skin without any makeup? Her lips were red and her teeth were white and cute. Which family's little girl could have such beautiful waist-length hair? It was so dark and shiny, and it was combed straight and smooth. It was like a waterfall on the outside of her white dress. Which family's little girl could have such heaven-defying legs? Wearing a pair of sapphire sandals, her slender legs drew beautiful arcs as she walked, giving off a sense of elegance that didn't seem tacky at all. Of course, when Cece ran, her small figure, which was full of vitality, was in contrast to this small dress that was supposed to be elegant and quiet. But what did that matter? Appearance was justice. Shishi was good-looking. Even when she ran, she didn't look like a crazy girl at all. She was still very charming and adorable. Shishi chased after Tong Tong, but Lan Xian was much more reserved. It was as if the dress that Shishi's grandma had carefully chosen for her was a magical seal that sealed her thoughts of playing with Shishi. Lan Exayan was like a little lady, with her hands crossed, and giggling as she stood by the side. Zhou Mingyu also liked this little girl who liked to eat and had a sweet mouth. Naturally, she wouldn't favor one and discriminate against the other. She would only choose clothes for Shishi, or buy Lan Exayan the same dress as Shishi. Zhou Mingyu still understood that Lan Exayan was a little chubby. If she wore the same clothes as Shishi, it wouldn't be pretty. Therefore, after careful selection, the old lady finally chose a set of clothes for Lan Exayan that didn't appear fat. The top was a black undershirt, and it was paired with a dark red coat. This coat was very particular. After the 3 big buttons were fastened, the sleeves on both sides opened up like a bat's wings. This kind of bat-sleeved shirt looked very unique. Not only was it not ugly, but it gave people a sense of confidence and elegance. The bottom was matched with a pair of black slim-fit trousers, and a pair of high-top black woolen boots. In this way, it could completely cover up Lan Exayan's chubby figure. Instead, it gave people the illusion that Lan Exayan was as thin as a normal girl. Regardless of whether it was an illusion or not, the Lan Xin in the mirror suddenly looked like an elegant and fashionable city girl. On top of that, the little girl's face was already rather cute to begin with. This fashionable little girl had a kind of beauty that made one's heart flutter. After Lan Exayan changed her clothes and came out, she received unanimous praise from everyone, including Murphy and Yang Yi. Only then did Lan Exayan rejoice in her heart. She was so shy that she was too embarrassed to follow Cici and make a fuss. Sure enough, there were only girls who didn't know how to dress up. There were no ugly girls. In front of Granny Zhou, who was the best at dressing up, Lan Exayan, who had a good foundation, was as pretty as Shishi. After changing her clothes, Yang Yi led the group and set off. Murphy had already gone to the venue to welcome the other singers and guests, while Yang Yi was slightly slower. They arrived at the venue at almost 4 o'clock. Yang Yi made arrangements for the 3 children, and asked Yang Huan and Ding Xiang to help take care of them. He accompanied Mo Henian to welcome some important guests from Taiwan. After all, this was the first time that Mo Fei held a concert in Baodao. Not to mention that Mo Henian, who was a little vain and wanted to return to his hometown in glory, invited Mo Fei's 2 uncles, as well as some of the Mo family's relatives and elders who were still in Baobei City to watch the concert. Some of Mo Henian's friends when he was young also asked him for tickets. Among them was the deputy mayor of Baobei City, Mr. Song Shiyu, who needed everyone to welcome. Song Shiyu was Mo Henian's classmate when he was in Baobei High School. In terms of political achievements, being a deputy mayor at the age of 60 was nothing to brag about. However, he was still a deputy mayor of a provincial city. Even though he was about to retire, he still had an extraordinary status, just like Guizi's father. Of course, if it were a few years ago, Song Shiyu wouldn't have known Mo Henian, the owner of a small farm. In the past, Song Shiyu, who was surrounded by people at the school's anniversary celebrations, didn't even greet Mo Henian. However, it was different now. Mo Henian's son-in-law was not only the superstar Yang Yi, but also the billionaire Yang Yi. Deputy Mayor Song made use of this hidden connection, and naturally wanted to get to know Mo Henian. On Saturday afternoon, he even invited Mo Henian to a banquet to catch up. During the banquet, the two were like old classmates who had known each other for many years. They sighed and sighed, almost holding hands and crying. Song Shiyu didn't deliberately show that he wanted to meet Yang Yi, but his thoughts were already clear. Yang Yi and Mo Henian also understood. After all, the overall economic development of Taiwan was very low. As the government, Song Shiyu also hoped that Yang Yi, the rich big boss, would invest in Taiwan. However, when it came to investing, both parties had to be willing. Yang Yi didn't have this idea at the moment, so he politely declined Song Shiyu's invitation to tour the development of Baobei City for the past 10 years with him and his wife on Sunday. Song Shiyu wasn't discouraged. He still accepted Mo Henian's invitation and came to Murphy's concert to support her. Yang Yi naturally had to give him the biggest welcome. Of course, during this period, Mo Henian was the proudest. The old man didn't want to be too high profile, so he didn't show it. However, Yang Yi could still guess what he was thinking from the occasional proud look in his eyes and the way he stroked his beard. Yang Yi felt that this was quite interesting. However, wasn't it his duty as the son-in-law to make his father-in-law proud? Tonight, I guarantee that you'll be in the limelight. Yang Yi thought to himself. Chapter 11:17. In the evening, Murphy's concert venue was bustling with activity. Although it was still early and there were still people entering the venue, most of the fans had already eaten dinner and couldn't wait to come early. After all, it wasn't easy to get the tickets, so it would be a waste if they didn't come early to join in the fun. Of course, it was still meaningful to come early. Taking advantage of the fact that the sun had not completely set and the beautiful orange sunset in the western sky, they could still take a beautiful selfie with the little surprise that Yang Yi had prepared for them today, and then proudly post it on the internet. It turned out that in order to cooperate with Mantis Shrimp Animation Company to promote Frozen, which was about to be released during the summer vacation, Yang Yi had asked the staff to arrange for a mysterious eco-friendly paper bag to be distributed to every audience member who had passed through the ticket inspection. After opening the bag, they were pleasantly surprised to find that in addition to a normal light stick and a plastic palm, there was also a Frozen-themed t-shirt printed with a cartoon of Elsa and Anna standing back to back, as well as the words Frozen's release date. Not only that, after rummaging through the paper bag, they could even see a small Snowbow doll key ring. The cute Snowbow instantly captured the hearts of many fans. Even the biased fans who only followed Murphy and Gu couldn't help but take out their phones to search for information about this animated movie. Of course, more fans knew about this story and the news that Frozen was about to be released. They were naturally very surprised to receive such a thoughtful gift and couldn't wait to take pictures and share it. This keyring is not bad, it's quite cute. Take it back. My youngest granddaughter will probably like it very much. No, the older kids will probably like it too. They'll probably fight for it, haha. In the VIP seats in the front row, Song Shiyu played with these small gifts with great interest and turned to laugh with Mo Henian. Mo Henian waved his hand casually and said, "There's no need to fight for it. Little Yang's factory made the toys himself. When we go back, I'll ask him to give some to your driver so that he can help you bring them back." At this moment, Shishi, who was talking to Lan Xian in the aisle next to her grandpa, heard some key words from her grandpa. She turned around and her gaze fell on the old man's hand. The little girl was anxious. She squeezed in front of her grandfather's knees and stretched out her slender little arms. The gauze that was as light as a cloud of smoke slid down to her shoulders. She pointed at the key ring and said seriously, "No, it's not a button. It's called Snowbow. Snow baby." Song Shiyu's expression was on point. He was so surprised that Shishi was very satisfied. "Yeah, it's called Snowbow. It's Sister Aisha's good friend," Shishi said excitedly. At this moment, Mo Henian interrupted and reminded, "Shishi, you have to call him Grandpa Song. Grandpa Song is Grandpa's classmate and the deputy mayor of Baobei City." "Haha, you don't have to tell the child this," Song Shiyu said with a smile. Song Shiyu smiled and said, "Old Mo, your granddaughter is really cute. I saw the news and she seems to be a small celebrity, right?" Mo Henian's eyes suddenly had a trace of pride, but he waved his hand reservedly. "What small celebrity? Her parents are more famous, and she also acted in some movies. It's just a small matter, a small matter." "Ha. Song Shiyu raised his head and laughed heartily. He paused and was about to go back to the previous topic. Shishi blinked her beautiful big eyes. She looked at her grandfather, and then at Grandpa Song. Finally, when there was a break in their conversation, she grabbed her grandfather's knee and turned her little head to look at Grandpa Song. She said, "Grandpa Song, let me tell you, Snowbow is actually a snowman. However, many snowmen can't move, but this one can. Also, its nose is made of carrots." In order to introduce Snowbow to Grandpa Song, so that he could go back and tell his granddaughters and grandchildren, the warm-hearted little girl was so excited that no one dared to interrupt her. Fortunately, after a while, Mo Shaowan, who was carrying Tong Tong, came over. She couldn't handle this little guy anymore. She said helplessly, "Mayor Song, third uncle, I'm sorry. I have to bring mommy backstage." But she insisted on looking for Sister Faye and brother-in-law. At this time, she couldn't stay still. She didn't have time to finish her story and hurriedly pulled Emo Xiaojuan's pants. She said happily, "I want to go too. I want to look for Daddy and Mom too. It's more interesting to go backstage with Daddy and Mommy. It's not comfortable to watch the concert in front." When Tong Tong heard this, he twisted his head in Emo Xiaojuan's arms and turned his head to look at his sister. He smiled and waved at his sister, as if he wanted to give her a high five. Perhaps it was because Lan Xian was wearing a beautiful set of clothes. She was very obedient today and sat on the chair obediently. On the other hand, Shi, who was dressed like a little princess, was not as steady and reserved as a princess at all. Her butt didn't even touch the chair. However, at this time, Lan Xian couldn't sit still anymore. She hurriedly jumped down from the chair and stood beside Shi. She also raised her head and said loudly, "I want to go too." This was nothing. Emo Xiaowan brought the three little guys backstage together. Song Shiyu let out a sigh of relief and smiled at Emo Henian. After a while, he pretended to casually turn to Emo Henian and said, "By the way, old Emo, just now you said that Yang Yi has a factory, right? He also has a manufacturing business." Putting aside the two scheming old men, when the three children reached the backstage, they immediately became the most popular stars among all the celebrities. Tong Tong, who was dressed up to look handsome and cute by his grandmother, attracted everyone's attention. Everyone fought to hug this little guy with a chubby face and a cool appearance. Of course, Tong Tong didn't like it when other people hugged him, especially Jie Chen, who didn't have children yet. Although this guy liked children very much and wanted to have children with his wife as soon as possible, he had almost zero experience in taking care of children. After hugging him for a while, Tong Tong pouted his little mouth and struggled to get down. Fortunately, it was Yuan Yan, who was more comfortable in the arms of an old nanny. Tong Tong finally quieted down for a while. Yuan Yan said happily, "Do you still remember last year when we were recording the Limit Challenge in Gusu City? Yang Yi brought Murphy and the two kids over. At that time, although Shi was the one who appeared the most on camera, the youngest one was still Mommy." When Shi heard Uncle Yuan mention her name, she turned her head curiously. "Yes, I remember. How old was Mommy back then?" "She was only a few months old, and she was still in her swaddling clothes," Jie Chen said with a smile. "I didn't even have a chance to look at her. But time passed very quickly. She grew up in the blink of an eye. I heard that she can speak a lot now." Yuan Yan looked at Tong Tong lovingly and said to him, "Mommy, call me uncle." Dan Hongkue argued with him. "What uncle? Call me uncle. Old Yuan, do you have any shame? How many years older are you than Yang Yi? Uncle?" At this time, Tong Tong smiled mischievously, shook his little head and said, No. The little guy didn't know which question he was responding to, but it happened to coincide with Dan Hongkue's question. Suddenly, the dressing room backstage was filled with laughter. Chapter 11:18. Oh, without any warning, the lights in the entire concert venue dimmed. Of course, not all of them were extinguished. It was just that the effect of the lights dimmed. There were still faint lights in the audience. However, this sudden change still made the audience cry out in surprise. A considerable portion of the fans reacted and looked at the stage in surprise. Sure enough, the big screens on the stage that were still dark gradually lit up. Gradually, everyone could see the endless sea in the darkness under the faint starlight and moonlight. The faint light reflected by the undulating waves made the darkness so beautiful that it was suffocating. Wow! The fans' praises could be faintly heard from the audience. Just now, they were still wondering why this concert was different from ordinary concerts. The front of the stage in the entire venue was made up of many huge screens that were pieced together to form an arc that faced them. So it turned out that it was to create such a beautiful lighting effect. Moreover, time passed very quickly in the picture. The sky gradually turned white, and the sea seemed to be getting clearer. Obviously, the concert was about to begin. However, the audience had no time to think about it. They happily took out their phones and took pictures of this miracle. After all, none of the concerts that they had seen or understood in the past were willing to spend so much money to create such a big scene. Yang Yi was probably the only one who had so much money, and was willing to be so willful for his wife. We've made a fortune. In their hearts, other than being surprised and amazed, the fans could not help but be pleased with themselves. They were afraid that after these photos were released, they would receive the envious and jealous greetings of many friends who did not manage to get the tickets, right? On the stage, the sun in the sky was already moving under the horizon. The bright sea, accompanied by the sound of the waves, also sounded the familiar melody of the fans. Crossing the sea to see you. Someone could not help but shout excitedly. Yes, Murphy returned the favor and gave them a beautiful surprise at the beginning of the concert. For you, I used half a year's savings to cross the sea to see you. For this gathering, I even practiced the breathing when we meet. In the sunlight that jumped out from the screen, Murphy slowly took the elevator and appeared on the stage. The goddess was dressed more casually and elegantly, but in everyone's eyes, she was still as beautiful as a fairy. She walked leisurely with a beautiful voice from the celestial world. Of course, the most wonderful thing was her voice. After all, only her voice could close the distance and let the fans sitting further away feel her charm. In a strange city, in a familiar corner, Murphy's low voice and sigh spread throughout the venue. At this time, the fans who gradually withdrew their gazes from the stunning screen effects were pleasantly surprised to find that the live sound effects were also so wonderful. Sitting so far away, Murphy's voice seemed to be singing softly in their ears. They did not know that Yang Yi was building a small music venue in Jiangqing's Tingshan district to hold a small fan meeting for Murphy. Not to mention the venue, the equipment inside was customized according to the standards of the live sound equipment of I Am a Singer. For this concert, Yang Yi asked people to bring the equipment to the venue in Baobei to try it out first. Of course, part of the sound equipment was rented from the manufacturer. But in any case, the audience who were lucky enough to get tickets for this concert did indeed enjoy the live sound effects of I Am a Singer. Murphy opened the concert and sang 3 of her classic songs in a row. Then, she paused for a while, raised the microphone and said softly to the audience, "Everyone should have heard that my mother used to be a singer. I also fell in love with music under her influence, fell in love with singing, and embarked on this road accompanied by music." Before she finished speaking, the fans below the stage cheered excitedly. As early as a week ago, there had been a report from the powerful media that Murphy's mother was likely to appear at Murphy's concert. After that, there were more and more revelations, but those were not important. Now that they heard Murphy say this, the fans below the stage knew that the news was true. Murphy's mother was going to go on stage. Regardless of whether Murphy's mother sang well or not, she was Murphy's mother. Of course, she had to support her. Murphy waited for the cheers to stop before she continued. "Actually, I know that my mother has always had a dream that all singers have, which is to hold her own concert. Although the conditions are limited, and my mother is old, and singing a song is more difficult, I still hope to help her realize her dream. So for the next song, everyone will treat it as my mother's concert. Then, I will be the guest and accompany my mother to finish singing this song, okay?" Murphy was not good with words, so she stuttered a lot when she said this, but the fans did not care. They were touched and shouted desperately, "Okay. Thank you. Now I'll have to trouble everyone to use the warmest applause to welcome the best singer in my heart, Ms. Zhou Mingyu, to come on stage." Murphy was touched and bowed. Then she said loudly. What came into view was Zhou Mingyu, who was wearing a cheongsam and didn't seem to have aged, gracefully walking out from the backstage. As the audience watched, they suddenly realized that the scene on the screen had quietly changed. It had changed from a beautiful natural scene to a home background with a historical charm. On the screen, there was a wall with old movie posters, an antique cabinet, a coffee table, a Western-style sofa, and a phonograph with a loudspeaker that was slowly turning. It was like a scene from the last century, and the whole background was yellowish, which matched the historical feeling that the background wanted to express. Zhou Mingyu, who was wearing a cheongsam, was more like a woman who walked out from a historical painting. Although her face was old, she was still elegant and calm, which made people gasp in admiration. Murphy gently held her mother's hand and walked her to the front of the stage. Without too many words, the live music started. It was a melodious violin prelude, just like Liang Zhu's violin music. It made people feel sad and lonely, but it was not that sad. It just made people feel the flow of time, and there was a touch of sadness. It fit perfectly with the background of the big screen. Under Mo-Fei's smiling gaze, Zhou Mingyu smiled gently. She raised the microphone, suppressed the rhythm, and sang softly. I have a flower planted in my heart waiting to bloom. That's right. The song that Yang Yi had prepared for his mother-in-law and wife was one of the most elegant female singers in his previous life, Lady May's most classic work, Woman Flower. Zhou Mingyu's voice was not that beautiful, but her singing skills had been honed and accumulated over the years. When she slowly sang the lyrics, it still gave people an indescribable sense of elegance. Perhaps, using elegance to describe her singing was quite appropriate. The audience below the stage listened attentively, and they were all moved by her slightly historical but not lacking elegance. Amazing! Murphy's mother also knows how to sing. The audience was surprised and exclaimed in their hearts. Of course, Zhou Mingyu's singing was good, and Murphy's singing was even more intoxicating. Zhao Zhao and Mumu, I'm eagerly waiting for someone with a heart to enter my dream. Murphy's voice was changeable, but she was more suited for this kind of deep song, especially when it was low. She could lower her voice and use it freely. With the top-notch sound effects, the audience could naturally hear the vicissitudes and loneliness in Murphy's singing, and they couldn't help but applaud one after another. The applause happened to be stuck in the middle of the song, and the faint accompaniment rose to a higher level. Murphy and her mother raised their voices at the same time, and sang the chorus of the song leisurely. Woman Flower, swaying in the mortal world. Woman Flower, swaying gently with the wind. The background did not change with the lyrics, but Zhou Mingyu's Cheongsam was like a flower, gently swaying in the background. At this moment, listening to the beautiful lyrics and looking at the scene on the stage, the audience actually had an illusion of time and space changing. It was as if they had also come to the golden age of the last century, and saw those elegant women who would not age singing with all their hearts. Perhaps it was because of this that they would not age, and would only bloom gracefully with time. Chapter 11:19. When you've been in love, you'll know how strong the wine is. When you've been drunk, you'll know how strong the wine is. When the flowers bloom and wilt, it's all in vain. The reason why this song could captivate the audience was not only because Murphy and her mother, Zhou Mingyu, sang it well, but also because of the lyrics of this song. It was brilliant and could perfectly express that calm attitude. However, the two girls backstage, Xixi and Lan Xian, couldn't appreciate the brilliance of the lyrics. After all, they were still young. Most of the time, they just listened to songs for fun. As a matter of fact, the two girls got together and stood at the exit of the backstage with their father. They curiously looked at the stage. Wow, Xixi, your grandma is singing too, Lan Xian said enviously. And she sings very well. Hee, that's right. My grandma and mommy both sing really well, Xixi said happily. But Xian, let me tell you, I like my grandma's clothes more. Her clothes? Lan Xian almost couldn't keep up with Xixi's thoughts. She looked at her with some confusion. Yes. Xixi's little hands were not idle. While playing with the net of her shawl, she said excitedly, my grandma's clothes are called cheongsams. They're very beautiful. Lan Xian's brain turned around this time. She smiled and said, oh Xixi, I know it's called cheongsams. My mom has one too. No, it's not the same. Your mom bought it at the store. My grandma's cheongsams were made by her. My grandma can make clothes, Xixi said proudly to her friends. Wow, your grandma can make clothes? Lan Xian looked at Lan Xian in surprise. She pointed to the clothes on her body and asked, then, my clothes are also made by your grandma? Lan Xian looked at Xixi with envy. She was probably thinking, why don't I have such a powerful grandmother? Xixi tilted her head and thought for a while. In the end, she shook her head and said honestly, I don't know. I've never seen grandma make clothes like this. Alright then, but I think mine looks pretty good too. Lan Xian didn't care. Instead, she happily pinched her clothes and twirled around. Then she smiled at Xixi. Yes, yes, I also think that you look super good today. She nodded in agreement. This compliment made Lon Exine even more elated. She was so happy that her eyes were about to disappear. The concert was very exciting. Not only did Murphy sing, but Murphy also invited many guests to the Baobei station, such as Chun Yijie and Qin Yu, who were definitely big names in the music industry. Especially Qin Yu. Although he had also ushered in the second spring of his singing career with I Am a Singer. It was undeniable that as a real singer born and raised in Taiwan, Qin Yu had always been a big star in Taiwan. His appearance added a lot of color to Murphy's concert. However, although the concert was already halfway through, and the audience was very satisfied with the wonderful singing, they were still not satisfied. They were still looking forward to the performance, unable to take their eyes off the stage. Because until now, the man that everyone was looking forward to the most had yet to appear. However, this man still seemed to be as mysterious as ever. Even in the second half of the concert, when Mo Fei invited the warm-up guests for the last time, which was the 6 people who had challenged the limit, she sang the Hokkien song Love to Strive to Win with these 6 people, who did not sing well, but Yang Yi still did not appear on the stage. Shouldn't this song be sung by Yang Eli and the extremely picky 6? The audience was confused by what they saw. What was going on? Could it be that after his mother-in-law appeared on the stage tonight, Yang Yi wouldn't come on stage? Just when everyone was getting impatient, a shocking scene appeared on the stage. After Murphy and the Extreme Challenge 6 finished singing Strive Hard to Win, they directly got off the stage. Wait, what about the stage? Just when everyone was dumbfounded, more than half of the lights on the stage suddenly went off. The remaining lights were like spotlights, shining on the other exit backstage. Under the guidance of the bright spots of light, everyone saw a tall man, holding a guitar, walking onto the stage. Oh, the audience below the stage applauded excitedly. It's really him. He's really too bad. Just when he was getting impatient from waiting, this guy suddenly popped up. He brought everyone a surprise, and they couldn't help themselves. That's right, it's Yang Yi. Yang Yi carried the guitar and walked to the front of the stage. At this time, the lights on the stage lit up. The audience then realized that there was an additional band behind the stage. There were drums, a few musicians carrying basses and guitars, and there was also a harmonica on the stage. But what made people want to scream excitedly was that the musicians on the stage were actually wearing sunglasses in the middle of the night. Of course, they weren't blind, but just wanted to look cool. Are they going to sing a rock song? When the audience saw this, they were all excited. They felt that Yang Yi's surprise attack this time was probably going to come up with a new song. The Hokkien song just now, Strive Hard to Win. Is everyone used to it? Yang Yi laughed. Below the stage, the audience couldn't help but cheer. There were also some people responding, but it was hard to hear what they were saying. Of course, their joy could still be seen. Let's sing another song, okay? Yang Yi continued. This time, the response was much more orderly. The audience shouted enthusiastically. Okay. Okay, then the next song, The World's Number One, is dedicated to everyone here, and also to our friends from Taiwan. I hope that you can all be happy and live a good life. After Yang Yi finished his inexplicable speech, he didn't give the audience much time to think. Behind him, the coquettish harmonica music started playing. Although the way a musician in sunglasses played the harmonica was very flashy and coquettish, the prelude to this song was very beautiful. The unique soft and seductive sound of the harmonica immediately captured the audience's ears. It was very beautiful. Of course, with the rhythm of the drum set and Yang Yi's guitar melody, the background music of the entire song also became rich. The scenery of life is like the surging winds of the sea, sometimes fierce, sometimes flat. My dear friends, be careful. Yang Yi started singing. It was the same Hokkien singing that many of the Taiwanese audience found very familiar. The other fans who came from afar didn't understand it and found it very impressive. But it didn't matter if they didn't understand it. On the big screens on both sides of the stage, subtitles of the lyrics were already displayed. It was directly translated into Mandarin. The scenery of life is like the surging winds of the sea. It was like watching a foreign movie. It didn't matter if you didn't understand what others were saying. Looking at the subtitles, you would feel as if you could understand it, and it would give you a special sense of accomplishment. When this song was sung, it seemed a little ordinary, like a monologue. But just like Strive to Win, when carefully listened to, it was like an aged wine that left a rich aftertaste. Although some of the lyrics, such as life's environment, begging for food will lead to success, required people who were familiar with the Hokkien language to understand a very special flavor. But there were also a lot of lyrics that were different from normal words, such as don't blame the heavens, don't blame people, follow your fate, and follow your fate for life. When listening to it, people could feel the profound philosophy of life. Perhaps the song was singing about a free and easy attitude towards life? Just like Yang Yi, who was holding his guitar and singing freely on stage, the audience felt comfortable watching and relaxed listening to it. Their feelings of joy spontaneously rose. Of course, if they couldn't drink that much chicken soup, then it didn't matter. Looking at Yang Yi's appearance when he was singing, the breeze from the mountain lifted his not too long hair, and his face, which wasn't particularly handsome, at this moment, because of his natural and unrestrained manner, because of his gentle smile, because of his spirited and deep eyes, instantly captivated many little fangirls. Short scenery, play when you're young. Yang Yi sang and laughed softly. That smile, which wasn't much at first, had a kind of devilishly charming handsomeness at this moment. Many of the fans below the stage couldn't help but raise their light sticks and wave them excitedly. Although he was just a middle-aged greasy uncle nearing 40 with a family and a wife, at this moment, Yang Yi's relaxed and casual singing actually gave people an indescribable attraction. Moreover, this attraction wasn't just for the little girls. Many of the male fans couldn't help but shout that their hearts couldn't take it anymore. They were about to be blown away by Yang Yi's handsomeness. Damn it, so handsome and so rich. How did he already have a wife? Why don't you have another girlfriend, do you mind? Mind. Have another boyfriend. Chapter 11:20. Murphy's concert lasted until 11 p.m., but the fans were still very enthusiastic. Although Murphy and Yang Yi came out and sang an extra duet, the fans were still reluctant to leave. After a while, it was already 2 a.m. when Yang Yi and Murphy returned to their place. Not to mention Tong Tong, who was already tired and asleep backstage. Shishi and Lan Xian had already been sent back by Mo Xiaowan to shower and sleep. Yang Yi put down Murphy's handbag and tiptoed to the room next door. When he turned on the light, he saw two little beauties in cartoon pajamas sleeping soundly on the bed with their eyes closed. Seeing the sleeping posture of the two little girls, Yang Yi couldn't help but smile. Shishi had snatched the two little blankets. Not only did she snatch them, but she didn't even cover herself with them. She kicked off his little blanket and piled it under her feet, while Lan Xian's little blanket was pressed under her arm. The little girl was still in her usual sleeping position. Even though there was a little blanket under her left arm, she was still sleeping soundly. Her cute little mouth even had a little smile. She probably came back at night and played with Lan Xian for a while. She was very happy. Lan Xian was more tragic. After her little blanket was snatched, she probably felt a little cold and curled up on her side, looking pitiful. I ate so much meat for nothing. I couldn't even snatch Shishi's blanket. Yang Yi smiled and shook his head. He softly muttered and helped Lan Xian turn over. Then he took the little blanket from under Shishi's little arm and covered her with it. When he covered Shishi with the blanket, he couldn't help but turn the little girl over and pretended to slap her little butt. Then he flipped her back and said softly with a smile, "Humph, you're usually so cute, but after you sleep, you become a little overlord?" Shishi was sleeping soundly, so naturally, she didn't hear her father's muttering. However, just as Yang Yi was covering Shishi with the little blanket, Shishi seemed to unconsciously raise her little hand and scratch her face. This movement almost gave Yang Yi a fright. He thought that Shishi had found out about his prank. Luckily, it was just a false alarm. When he returned to his and Murphy's bedroom, Yang Yi found that Murphy had just changed into casual clothes and was sitting at the dressing table next to her hair, which was tied up from the concert. "Aren't you going to shower and sleep? It's already so late." Yang Yi sat on the bed next to her and asked with concern. In fact, Yang Yi didn't need to spend much effort to arrange the concert, because most of the work was handed over to the professionals. As for the communication and other arrangements, Mo Shaowan and the other people in the company took care of most of the work. This was also why Yang Yi had the time to take the children around these few days, including this morning. Of course, Murphy still had a hard time. After all, this was her concert. She had to sing a lot of songs and memorize many steps and processes. Whether it was the preparation for the concert or today's performance, she had consumed a lot of energy. In contrast, the burden on Yang Yi's shoulders was much lighter. Even during the concert, he was still playing with the two little girls backstage, unlike Mo Fei, who came back in a hurry to change clothes and drink water while standing. Therefore Yang Yi, who loved his wife, said softly, "Rest well tonight. Tomorrow morning, I'll take Shishi and the others out to play. Sleep a little more and I'll come back to pick you up for lunch in the afternoon." Murphy giggled. She got up from the dressing table, crossed her long legs and knelt on the bed. She hugged Yang Yi's shoulders from the side like a spoiled child and whispered softly, "I don't want to sleep." "If you don't want to sleep, then what do you want to do?" Yang Yi was a little surprised. Then he pinched her nose in amusement and said, "I'm fine with it, but can your body take it if I have to toss and turn for another night?" "Ah!" Murphy screamed. She stuck her hands in Yang Yi's hair and shook him back and forth. She said angrily, "Who said I want to do that? What are you thinking about in that head of yours?" Murphy's face was still red. Clearly, she also thought of the scene of tossing and turning that Yang Yi said. "Then what do you mean?" Yang Yi asked, puzzled. "Come with me and see." Murphy smiled slyly. She took a step back with her knees and got off the bed. Then, she held Yang Yi's hand and pulled him to the courtyard. At this time, everyone else was asleep. Not to mention the two elders, Mo Henian and Zhou Mingyu, even Mo Shaowan, who came to accompany the children, yawned and went back to her room to rest when Yang Yi and Murphy came back. Therefore, the courtyard was quiet. It was so quiet that one could hear the screeching of the car tires on the road in the distance. "Look." Murphy held Yang Yi's hand, and the two of them went to the deepest part of the courtyard. Actually, before Murphy reached out her hand, Yang Yi saw a medium-sized female motorcycle. Although this motorcycle looked clean as if someone had taken care of it, Yang Yi could still see that the paint had faded a lot. It seemed to have gone through the baptism of time. Seeing this motorcycle, Yang Yi already understood what Murphy wanted to do. He smiled and turned back to look at Murphy. He said, "What you mean is that we won't sleep tonight and we'll drive this motorcycle for a ride." "Yes, but not for a ride. We're going to Keelung to watch the sunrise tonight." Murphy gracefully twirled in front of Yang Yi as if she was dancing ballet. She skipped around to the front of the motorcycle and touched the front of the motorcycle, while mischievously winking at Yang Yi. "I called my cousin to borrow this motorcycle. I didn't expect that although he doesn't work in Baobei City, he could still help me get a motorcycle in Baobei City." At this moment, Yang Yi felt as if he had traveled through time and space and saw a mischievous little girl Murphy. Although she was pretty, her cuteness gave Yang Yi a new feeling. Of course, he still liked her. He liked her very much. However, Yang Yi was still more rational. He walked over and held Murphy's face in his hands. He said in a slightly reproachful tone, "Silly wife, what are you thinking? Are you worried that I'll be jealous? There's no such thing. I don't care. Don't ruin your body over such a small matter. What does it have to do with you being jealous?" Murphy was a little embarrassed to admit it. She giggled and turned her head, hugging Yang Yi's arm instead. "Don't worry about me. Let's just go out and play, okay?" "No, you didn't rest tonight." Yang Yi shook his head. Mo Fei pouted her lips, pulled Yang Yi's hand, and twisted it a few times, imitating Cece's coquettish behavior. "Can we go together? I want to be with you. I want to have such an unforgettable memory with you. I haven't been with you to watch the sunrise by the beach alone. Every time, there's a child with me. We haven't gone out to play like a couple." Although Murphy did want to take care of Yang Yi and didn't want Yang Yi to be jealous, what she said was not an excuse at the last minute. She really wanted to be with Yang Yi and have the most beautiful memories. Yang Yi hesitated after hearing what she said. Murphy didn't understand Yang Yi. She could tell at a glance that he was wavering. She immediately struck while the iron was hot and said, "Also, didn't you say that we should be more carefree and find a time to go on an impromptu trip? Tonight, let's be willful for once. You drive the motorcycle, and we'll secretly go to Keelung to watch the sunrise, okay?" Staying up late once in a while wasn't a big deal. Yang Yi's energy wouldn't be reduced even if he didn't sleep for a night. As for Murphy, she could also take a nap in the car. Thinking of this, Yang Yi was also tempted. In the end, he still asked the last question hesitantly. "What about tomorrow? If we skip home and go to Keelung to play? What if Shishi and Chen will wake up in the morning and realize that mom and dad aren't home? What if they make a scene? I told Xiaowan to help take care of him tomorrow. We'll come back after watching the sunrise. It won't take too long." Murphy giggled and said, "At most, we'll leave a note for Shishi at home. Shishi is so obedient, she definitely won't make a scene. We'll ask her to help us take care of little brother." Chapter 11:21. Before making the decision to leave home, Yang Yi remembered what Yuan Yan had said to him. Actually, it was about tonight. At that time, Mo Fei was singing on stage, while Yuan Yan and the other members of the Extreme Challenge team were backstage. It was not their turn to go on stage yet, so they played with the child and talked about marriage and children. It was mainly Yuan Yan and Yang Yi who were talking. At most, Jie Yuchen would say a few words. After all, the others were either not married or did not have children. At that time, Zhu Jie jokingly asked Yang Yi who he liked the most, Shishi and Tong Tong. Yang Yi naturally would not tell the truth in front of the two children. He smiled and said that he liked both of them. In the family, the two of them would always have the highest status. Yuan Yan half-jokingly said to Yang Yi, "That won't do. Yang Yi, a man can't only care about his daughter and son. He has to love his wife." This sentence was not a big deal, because later, Jie Yuchen and Dan Hongkue teased Yuan Yan, saying that Yang Yi loved Murphy and was a famous model husband in the entertainment circle. But in fact, when Yuan Yan said that, he added another sentence, which really touched Yang Yi. After all, children will grow up. They will have their own lives. In the end, the person closest to you is still your wife. At that time, because the stage supervisor came to inform them to prepare, it was chaotic. Yang Yi did not have time to think carefully about this sentence. Now that he suddenly thought of it, Yang Yi made a decision. "Let's go and watch the sunrise." Late at night, at 2:30, the gate of the ancestral home of the Mo family was opened. Two tall figures stealthily pushed a small motorcycle out. After walking out of the shade, the slightly delicate figure behind them revealed a pair of bright and excited eyes. Let's go, don't get caught by my papa." Murphy was more than 30 years old, but now she was like a thief. She was nervous and excited as she grabbed Yang Yi's clothes and said, "Put on your helmet first. Have you put on your coat? It might be cold on the road later." Yang Yi stopped the motorcycle and turned around. While tying the strap of Murphy's helmet, he gently said with concern, "Hee, I've worn enough. If I wear more, I'll die from the heat." Murphy put her hands on Yang Yi's waist and said with a sweet smile, "Besides, don't I have you? With you, I won't be afraid of the cold." Needless to say, Yang Yi asked Mo Fei to get on the woman's motorcycle first, and then he sat in the front. "I'll sit a little farther back to give you more space, because your butt is big hee. Mo Fei's muffled voice came from behind. She was trying her best to move backward. After all, this small motorcycle was not big. It was incomparable to the cars and big minivans they usually drove. Yang Yi and Mo Fei could barely sit on it. And in comparison, Yang Yi's huge body size was a cruel crush on this small motorcycle. But there were advantages to squeezing. Murphy could easily hug Yang Yi's waist. She sat comfortably at the back and put her face on Yang Yi's back. She happily said, "Okay, I'm sitting properly. We can go now. Let's go." Yang Yi's left hand pinched the brake and his right hand gently twisted the accelerator and pressed the ignition switch. This motorcycle was not an electric car, but like a car, the sound of the engine sounded. At that moment, Yang Yi also felt like a thief. He was a little excited and couldn't help but yell. He released the brakes and stepped on the gas to move forward. This feeling was very subtle. It was different from Murphy's. Murphy only felt that she was like when she was young, secretly following Yang Yi on an adventure behind her father's back. Yang Yi felt like he was a flower thief, stealing someone's daughter and running away with her in the car. He even had a feeling that his father-in-law was about to rush out with a shotgun and kill him. Hurry up and run. On the brightly lit road of Baobei City, a small motorcycle was driving steadily. The neon lights of the city flowed on its body, as if it was shuttling back and forth in the river of time. Who would have thought that in the middle of the night traffic, this small motorcycle was carrying the two big stars who had received the cheers and applause of tens of thousands of people at the concert that night? Since there wasn't, then all the titles, honor, status, and light would be thrown away. Now it was just an ordinary couple going to the beach to watch the sunrise. I'm so happy. Murphy did not seem to feel tired at all. Behind the motorcycle, she was sandwiched between Yang Yi and the trunk. She felt very safe. She even waved one of her arms excitedly and shouted towards the sky. Although Murphy's voice sounded a little muffled through the helmet, the happiness in his voice could not be concealed. Sit tight, hold me. Yang Yi was worried that Murphy would fall. He was a daring man, so he continued to drive with his right hand, while his left hand reached behind him to catch Murphy's hand. Yang Yi asked Murphy to put both of her hands in the pockets of his jacket, so that she could block some of the wind. Although it was summer, it was late at night, and the temperature was much lower. Plus, on the empty road, the wind was like a knife, cutting their skin painfully. Yang Yi did not care, but he had to take good care of Murphy. Humph, what an unromantic guy. Mo Fei muttered, but when she looked at Yang Yi's back, her eyes were filled with honey. She then leaned her head against Yang Yi's back sweetly. Wearing the motorcycle helmet, Murphy could lean against Yang Yi's warm and broad back, which made her feel very safe. After leaving the downtown area of Baobei City, they went on the national highway to Keelung. There were fewer cars on the road, and it was almost impossible to see a car driving by in a few minutes. After all, the cars were all on the highway. Although the streetlights on the national highway could still illuminate sections of the road at intervals, they were like lonely nights traveling in the endless darkness of the wilderness. There was no one else to go with them, only themselves. Huh. Murphy yawned and said, a little bored. Did we come out too early? Look around, it's still dark, and we can't see any scenery. It's a little early, but we have to wait for the sky to brighten before we go to Keelung. I'm afraid the sun will be up before we get there. Yang Yi laughed happily. It's too troublesome to look at the stars, and we have to look up, Murphy said gloomily. It was not that she had lost interest, but after yawning, she was so sleepy that she could not take it anymore and wanted to sleep. Take a nap. It's okay, I can hold you. You don't have to worry about falling. Yang Yi saw this and stopped the car by the roadside. He let Murphy sit in front of him, and he sat up straight, letting her lean against his chest comfortably. No, it's not safe. Murphy was still a little worried and said stubbornly, I'll chat with you, I can't let you be bored. Although she said that, being able to comfortably lean against Yang Yi's chest, Murphy finally could not resist the heavy fatigue. After a while as they chatted, she became a little absent-minded. Gradually, under the embrace of Yang Yi's arms, she closed her eyes and fell into a light sleep. Seeing this, Yang Yi eased off the accelerator, stepped on the brake, and let go again to let the car slow down. Then he retracted his left hand and hugged Murphy's soft little belly. P.S. Please do not imitate, this is a dangerous action. Although it was just a light hug, and he was prepared to raise his left hand to grab the motorcycle handle at any time, this hug gave Murphy a strong sense of security. She gently twisted and fell asleep comfortably. When it came to driving, Yang Yi had been able to play with motorcycles in his previous life. He had even ridden a mountain bike, leaping and weaving through the jungles of Southeast Asia. With his superb driving skills, Yang Yi could naturally protect Murphy's safety. At this time, Shi, who was still sleeping at home, seemed to have had a nightmare. She fell asleep on her side, her little feet kicking in the air. Chapter 11:22. Yang Yi had found the map on his phone. Following the road signs, he sped all the way. Finally, before the sunrise, before the sleeping Keelung woke up, and before the traffic police noticed him, he passed through Keelung's downtown area and arrived at the beach in the northeast. Because it was his first time there, and he was unprepared, Yang Yi could only drive the motorcycle along the coastline to find the most suitable sightseeing spot. Unexpectedly, he was lucky enough to find an excellent sightseeing spot, a brand new small fishing pier. Why was it brand new? Because it was completely new, some of the facilities had not been removed, and there were no fishing boats around it. Naturally, there wouldn't be a fishy smell, but the other places were already very clean. Also, because of the sea breeze, the cement road was so clean that it looked as if someone had cleaned it. Strangely, perhaps because it was the Dragon Boat Festival holiday, or because the workers didn't live in such a desolate place, the small pier was empty. There wasn't a single person. Seeing this, Yang Yi drove the motorcycle in, and stopped in front of a mooring post at the east end of the pier. It was 5 in the morning. Although the sky was still green, compared to when they were on the road, the sky was much brighter, and the scenery in the distance could be seen clearly. Obviously, it wouldn't be long before the sun came out. But Yang Yi was still hesitating. Should he wake Murphy up now? Or should he let Murphy sleep for a while? Yang Yi was leaning towards the latter, because Murphy had only slept for about an hour in the car. Yang Yi wanted to wait for the sky to brighten before waking her up. But then, Murphy woke up by herself. Perhaps it was because after the motorcycle stopped, there was less vibration and less rumbling sound. The world seemed to have become quiet all of a sudden. This made Mo Fei feel a little uncomfortable, so he frowned, opened his eyes sleepily, looked around, and then stretched his body, letting out a long lazy hum. Sound like a piglet. You're up. Yang Yi asked with a smile as he held Murphy's slender waist with his left hand, and combed her hair with his right hand. Murphy did not answer. She stretched and hugged Yang Yi's neck from behind with her soft arms. She was like a big brown bear that had just come out of hibernation. She treated Yang Yi as a tree trunk and rubbed her back and head against him. Of course, Murphy only wanted to find a more comfortable position in Yang Yi's arms. Then, she pulled Yang Yi's other hand and let him hug her with both hands. She also hugged Yang Yi's big hand, and then lazily whispered, "Have we arrived?" "Yes, this is Keelung's seaside. The sun hasn't risen yet." Yang Yi smiled and said, "Since you're awake, let's sit on the ground. It's not comfortable to sit on the motorcycle." "Yeah, my back hurts." Murphy nodded. She straightened up and let Yang Yi get down from the back seat first. But then, Yang Yi stood to the side and saw that Murphy had no intention of getting down. She only yawned and blinked her beautiful eyes at him. Yang Yi understood Murphy's meaning. He was happy and reached out his 2 hands with a smile and asked, "Do you want a hug?" "Yes." Murphy suddenly beamed with joy. She reached out her 2 arms and hugged Yang Yi's neck. Then, Yang Yi held her butt and carried her down from the motorcycle. Fortunately, Yang Yi was trained and had great strength. Otherwise, Murphy, who was 1.7 meters tall and looked thin, but actually weighed more than 50 kilograms, would have been enough to make Yang Yi suffer. But after all, he was trained. Yang Yi easily carried Murphy down from the motorcycle. But there was a small accident at the end. Murphy's long legs were an obstacle. When she was carried out, she accidentally hooked the motorcycle. Clang! The motorcycle flipped over on the ground. Fortunately, Yang Yi carried Murphy and dodged. At this time, Murphy, who wanted to act coquettishly and be lovey-dovey with Yang Yi, couldn't bear it anymore. She got down from Yang Yi's body and hugged Yang Yi's arm, laughing with him. 10 minutes later, the poor motorcycle had been lifted up and stopped not far behind them. Yang Yi and Murphy sat at the end of the long embankment, leaning against the mooring post and looking at the sea. They didn't sit on the ground. Below their butts, Yang Yi made a small carpet with newspapers. Although the sea breeze blew and rolled the newspapers, with their butts, they weren't afraid that they would fly away. "I only knew that you bought milk and bread at the gas station. I didn't even notice that you bought newspapers. Hee hee, you are really smart." Murphy giggled. She was still nestled in Yang Yi's arms, leaning against him comfortably. The coat that she was wearing was now reversed in front of her body to block the biting cold sea breeze. Behind her was Yang Yi's warm embrace. Yang Yi even opened his coat and connected it with Murphy's. This way, the two of them could be wrapped together. Although Yang Yi's body was good and he didn't feel cold, this feeling of snuggling up to each other and warming each other was also very blissful. Murphy happily held the milk that was still a little warm and sipped it. From time to time, she would pass it to Yang Yi and let him have a sip. At that time, when I bought some food, I saw the newspaper and thought that it should come in handy, so I bought one. I didn't expect it to come in handy. Yang Yi smiled and said, "At that time, you were taking photos and signing autographs for the shop staff. Of course you didn't notice." And then, at this time Murphy felt a gust of sea breeze. She was no longer sleepy, so she wanted to enjoy this moment more. The world was white, the sea, the dock, in such an empty world. It was as if only she and Yang Yi were left. "Hubby, do you feel happy? Let's sneak out and have a world of just the two of us?" Murphy asked in a sweet voice. "Of course I'm happy. The time with you will always be happy and blissful," Yang Yi said with a little emotion. "You're right. We should have some exclusive memories. I can't wait to watch the sunrise with you." Hee, actually, I still feel a little guilty. I left Xixi and Huahua at home, and the two of us came out to have fun. Although Mo Fei said that, her pretty face was full of excitement and joy. There was no sense of guilt at all. Also, although sitting here and my face is a little cold from the wind, it doesn't matter. When I'm with you, I feel very happy. I'm not afraid of anything, and I don't want to care about it anymore. When Yang Yi heard that her face was a little cold, he stretched out his two big hands and rubbed them hard. When they were warm, he held Murphy's face from behind. Murphy's excited description came to an abrupt end, as if she was stuck in a shell. Yang Yi asked with a smile, "This way it won't be so cold." Before he could say the word okay, Murphy suddenly turned around in his arms. She looked at Yang Yi's face affectionately, and her eyes shone with a touched light. Before Yang Yi could react, Murphy hugged his head and kissed him with her soft red lips. One kiss suffocating. Mo Shaowan, who had been entrusted with a heavy responsibility, was used to sleeping in. She was still sleeping in the bedroom, but the other children woke up very early, especially Xixi. She usually woke up early to exercise with her father. The little girl was the same today. She woke up early, and as usual, she tossed and turned in bed, waiting for her father to wake her up. But it was strange. Why didn't her father wake her up today? The little girl couldn't fall asleep. She rolled over and sat up. She rubbed her eyes and looked around in confusion. Fortunately, Xionaire was still sleeping next to her. She couldn't wait any longer. She moved her little butt and moved to Lan Xion's pillow. She pushed her little friend and woke her up. Lan Xion was pulled up by Xixi in a daze. She yawned, and it took her a while to recover. She touched her chubby little belly and muttered, "Oh, I'm hungry." Lan Xion ate dinner early last night. Backstage at the concert, she didn't eat any snacks or supper. Later, she came back and took a shower and went to sleep. If she hadn't been sleeping just now, her stomach would have been growling. However, Xixi, who couldn't hold it in any longer, didn't respond to Lan Xion's topic. She giggled and said to Lan Xion, "Xionaire, let me tell you. I had a big nightmare last night." "What nightmare?" Lan Xion asked in a daze. "That's right. I dreamed that my mom and brother were taken away by bad guys." The little girl said excitedly, "I was crying but my papa came out. He was super powerful. He defeated the bad guys and saved mom and brother." "Oh, it wasn't about food." Lan Xion was a little dispirited. Hee, but I forgot how my papa defeated the bad guys. I forgot when I woke up. Chapter 11:23. After being woken up by Xixi and listening to a story for a while, Lan Xion's sleepiness was gradually dispelled. After the little girl's head was clear, she felt a little hungry. Finally, she couldn't help but interrupt Xixi and said pitifully, "Xixi, I'm really hungry. Do you have anything to eat?" It was also at this time that Lan Xion remembered that this was not her home. Nor was it Shishi's bedroom. Otherwise, she could have found some snacks that she usually hid. Her friend's question really stumped Shishi. She scratched her head and said awkwardly, "Oh, I don't have any either." How could Shishi have the habit of storing food? Hearing this, Lon Xian collapsed on the bed softly and said in a dispirited voice, "I'm starving to death." Seeing this, Shishi said enthusiastically, "Let's go find my papa. My papa must have woken up. He must know where to eat." Yes. Lon Xian's eyes lit up as a surge of energy surged through her body, allowing her to regain her vitality. She hurriedly climbed out of bed and even slid out of bed nimbly as she urged, "Cece, let's go quickly." Yes, yes. Shishi giggled and followed her friend out of their bedroom. They didn't notice that on the small cabinet beside the bed that they had just passed, there was a note that Yang Yi and Murphy had left for them. It was forgotten there alone. When Shishi and Lon Xian came out, it was still very early. It was not 5:30 yet. The whole room was quiet, but the voice-activated sensor light illuminated the corridor for the little guys. "Papa, hey Papa, where's Mom?" But when they opened the door and turned on the light, Shishi was dumbfounded. She looked in confusion at the bedroom where her parents were sleeping. There was no one inside. Not only was the bed empty, even Tong Tong was gone. Shishi didn't know that Tong Tong and the crib had been moved to Mo Xiaojuan's room, and Mo Xiaojuan was taking care of them. Lon Xian's reaction was a little slow. She walked in and looked around in confusion for a long time before she said in surprise, "Yeah, where's Papa Yang? It's over. If Papa Yang disappeared, she might starve." Shishi stood rooted to the ground in a daze, but her beautiful big eyes were moving nimbly. After a while, the young lady suddenly clapped her hands in surprise and pulled Lon Xian's arm as she said happily, "I know. Xian, I got it." There seems to be something wrong with his reaction. How could he be happy? What? Lon Xian looked at her friend in bewilderment. "I know where Papa went," Shishi said excitedly. "It turns out that I saw it in my dream. My mom and little brother were taken away by bad guys, and then my papa went to save them." Taken away by bad guys? Lon Xian's eyes widened. She nervously hugged Shishi's arm and asked fearfully, "Really?" At this moment, in Lon Xian's mind, she had already equated the bad guy with a monster. Moreover, Lon Xian remembered the fright she had received when she was sleeping in the study a few nights ago. So there really are monsters. The image of a terrifying demon with a black demonic aura instantly surfaced in Lon Xian's mind. She felt that she was right, but at the same time, she began to tremble in fear. What should I do? The demons had captured Mommy Mo and Little Mommy. Would they still come for me? Lon Xian felt that she might be the monster's favorite since she was white and tender and chubby. Shishi showed a completely different reaction. She giggled and said, "Xian, don't be afraid. My papa is super powerful. He can defeat the bad guys." No, he has already defeated the bad guys because I saw it." Lon Xian was so scared that her body went soft. She sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at Shishi worriedly. But Shishi, that was just a dream. What if Papa Yang didn't defeat the bad guys? Shishi also hesitated. After a while, she had an idea. "I know, I can ask my papa." "How?" Lon Xian looked at Shishi in confusion. At this time, Shishi was a little proud. She said with joy, "I have an idea." The little girl touched her neck and pulled out a red rope. Then, she pulled out a Buddha statue that still had the residual warmth of the little girl's body from the collar of her pajamas. This Buddha statue was very small and made of wood. It was not as conspicuous as jade, but after being worn by Cece for more than a year, this piece of wood had already been polished. It looked like its color had settled down, and it was even rounder and brighter. Lon Xian certainly knew that Shishi had such a pendant. She looked at it curiously. Although Cece had almost never used this Buddha statue, her clever little brain still clearly remembered how her father had taught her how to use it. She pinched the head and tail of the Buddha statue and pressed it. Hey! Lon Xian was surprised to see that the head of the Buddha statue was pressed into her stomach. At this time, Yang Yi and Murphy were sitting by the sea and ushering in the magnificent scene they had been looking forward to for a long time. The sunrise over the sea. Like the description in Elderbaugh's prose that many people had learned in school. A beautiful red glow spread over the sky and became brighter and brighter. Then, a small half of the face of the sun was revealed. At this moment, it was like a little kid who had eaten too much and wanted to jump onto the bed to play with its master. After trying a few times, it finally jumped out and revealed its round and fat true face. Wow! It's so beautiful! Murphy nestled in Yang Yi's arms and looked at the sun that had just left the sea and was gradually blooming with golden light. At this time, Yang Yi's cell phone rang at an inappropriate time. Murphy looked back at Yang Yi, who was busy taking out his cell phone, and asked in confusion, "Alarm clock." Hearing this specially set ringtone, Yang Yi frowned, shook his head, looked at the cell phone screen, and said in a deep voice, "No, it's Shishi's pendant. I don't know what happened." Pendant? Murphy didn't get enough sleep and her reaction was a little slow. For a while, she didn't understand what Yang Yi was talking about. Yang Yi was worried that something would happen to his daughter, so he didn't have time to explain and quickly answered the phone. "Papa." Shishi's clear and pleasant voice came through. Yang Yi heard his daughter's cheerful tone, and he breathed a sigh of relief. "Sisi, what's going on? Why did you call Papa with this?" Yang Yi asked. "Papa, did you defeat the bad guy? Did you save Mom and brother?" On the phone, the little girl asked excitedly. "Ah." Yang Yi was confused by his daughter's words. "Bad guy? What bad guy?" Yang Yi was not completely relieved, and he seriously asked Shishi. Finally, with Shishi's description and Lan Xian's agreement from time to time, Yang Yi finally figured out what was going on. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and looked at Murphy, who was listening next to him. Murphy had a guilty conscience, and she winked at Yang Yi, asking Yang Yi to quickly find an excuse to cover up this matter. "Ahem, Shishi, you're right. Daddy did defeat the bad guy and saved Mommy." Yang Yi coughed dryly and went with the flow as he spoke. "Yeah." Shishi's excited cheers came from her side, and the little girl seemed to be happily showing off to Lan Xian. "Xian, see, I'm right. What about Momo? Did you save Momo?" Lan Xian asked. "Momo? Momo was not taken by the bad guy. Bad guys don't catch children. When I went to save Mom, I left Momo with Auntie Xiaowan and asked her to help take care of her," Yang Yi explained. Yang Yi said this to cover up his lie, and on the other hand, he didn't want this matter to scare Lan Xian. Lan Xian seemed to be very scared just now. Murphy, who was next to him, covered her mouth and laughed. She also pushed Yang Yi's arm with her palm and said with a reproachful look, "You're really good at making up stories." Sure enough, after hearing Yang Yi's words, Lan Xian breathed a sigh of relief. "Oh, that's great. I was wondering why Shishi and I were not taken away by the bad guy. Hee, it turns out that bad guys don't catch children." At this time, Shishi was happy, and she came over and asked sweetly, "Papa, then when will you come back? I miss you so much." "How long has it been?" Murphy couldn't help but say, "Shishi, why don't you ask Mom when she will come back? Don't you miss Mom? Mom was taken away by the bad guy. It's so dangerous." No, I miss Mama too," Sisi giggled. "But Mama is with Papa." At this time Lan Xian, who had calmed down, came over again and asked pitifully, "Papa Yang, when will you come back? I'm starving to death." Hearing this, Yang Yi shook his head helplessly and laughed. He coaxed the two little girls and taught them to find something to eat in the kitchen fridge. Then he hung up the phone. Phew, it's finally over. Yang Yi looked at Murphy and smiled helplessly. Mo Fei sat there giggling. Her beautiful eyes reflected the bright sunshine, so beautiful that people couldn't take their eyes off her. "The sun is over. What should we do next?" Yang Yi asked softly. In fact, they could find the answer from each other's eyes without Murphy's answer. They had enough fun, and began to miss their children. It was time to go back. Chapter 11:24. Hey Shishi, why are you and Xianair standing here? Back at the Mo family's ancestral home in Baobei City, Murphy opened the big iron gate, and was surprised to see Shishi and Lan Xian standing behind the gate sneakily. When Shishi and Lan Xian saw that Yang Yi had also come back with a motorcycle, they finally breathed a sigh of relief. They looked like little adults, as if they were saying, "It's good that you came back safely." Of course, although Shishi was no stranger to motorcycles, there were many motorcycles in the old town where she studied. She was still very curious about why her father was pushing a motorcycle. She ran over and touched it curiously, then hurriedly passed the important information to her father. Papa, it's not good. Grandpa is very angry," the little girl said to her father worriedly. He was unhappy when he was eating breakfast. "I told Grandpa that Papa went to beat up the bad guys and then saved Mama, but he was still unhappy." Lan Xian nodded quickly and said, "Yes, Auntie Shawan was also scolded. Shishi's grandfather is really fierce." It turned out that Shishi and Lan Xian had deliberately waited here to pass on the message. When Yang Yi heard this, he couldn't help but look at Murphy. Murphy was holding back her laughter, while Yang Yi's eyes were a little helpless. "It's over." Murphy spread her hands. "It's probably the little guys who leaked the secret. There's no other way. We can only play it by ear." After passing on the message, Shishi and Lan Xian took out a boiled egg from their pockets. Shishi said with concern, "Papa, are you hungry? I was afraid that Grandpa wouldn't let you eat, so I left an egg for you." "Mommy Amo can eat mine," Lan Xian said obediently. "Wow, you left an egg for us? You are so considerate. Are you guys full?" Yang Yi and Murphy didn't expect the two little girls to be so sensible. They were so touched that they hugged the two little girls and kissed them again and again. "I'm full," Shishi giggled. "I'm full too. Shishi's grandmother made a lot of delicious breakfast." Lan Xian's eyes lit up and she quickly responded, "There are delicious eggs, boiled eggs, fried eggs, and delicious bread. The most amazing thing is that there's so much delicious meat. It's super fragrant." When Yang Yi heard this, he understood that Zhou Mingyu was making a Western-style breakfast today. To be exact, it was a Hong Kong-style breakfast. They had tasted it at home before. Passing through the courtyard, Yang Yi thought for a while, and asked Murphy to take the two children back to the back. "You haven't slept for a whole night. Go take a hot bath and sleep. I'll explain to Dad." In fact, Yang Yi wasn't sure, but he knew that Murphy was too sleepy. On the way back, she basically didn't sleep and kept yawning. Now she was so sleepy that she was dizzy. "How can I do that? My dad is very angry. I have to stop him from beating you," Murphy said worriedly. Although Murphy was very worried, Yang Yi insisted that she take Shishi and Lan Xian back to the bedroom. Murphy had no choice but to watch Yang Yi walk along the corridor to Imohenian's room. Yang Yi nervously knocked on the door, and Zhou Mingyu opened the door. Immediately, Yang Yi saw Imohenian sitting on a wooden armchair with a dark expression. Beside him, the aroma of tea wafted in the air, but it was unable to calm his anxious heart. "Oh you, how old are you already? Still messing around with Fei Fei?" Zhou Mingyu rushed to reprimand Yang Yi before the old man could. "If Shawan hadn't told us, we wouldn't have known that you guys were so daring to ride a motorcycle to Keelung in the middle of the night. Didn't you consider the safety issue?" Zhou Mingyu's reprimand was raised high, but lowered gently. Clearly, she was secretly helping Yang Yi smooth things over. If it had been Imohenian who said it, the atmosphere would have exploded. "Yes, Mom. We know we were wrong. We won't be stubborn next time." Yang Yi hurriedly lowered his head and obediently admitted his mistake. "It's not enough that you know you were wrong. You still have to reprimand Fei Fei." Zhou Mingyu said, "No, this has nothing to do with Fei Fei. It's all my fault. I told her I wanted to go see the sunrise. If you want to blame someone, blame me." Yang Yi said, scratching his head. "It's right that you know you're to blame." Imohenian slammed the table heavily and said sternly, "Yang Yi, back then, I also saw that you were mature and steady and knew how to take care of others. That's why I let bygones be bygones and married my daughter to you. Now that you're almost 30, why are you acting like a child? You still like to mess around?" Yang Yi lowered his head and listened obediently. His face was full of guilt, but he did not dare to refute. However, Zhou Mingyu was still helping him. "Don't just blame little Yang. If you ask me, this matter definitely has something to do with your daughter. When Fei Fei was young, She snuck out to Keelung to play once and caused a ruckus at home. This time there's no need to think about it. It's definitely Feifei's idea. But little Yang, you're not young anymore. Feifei didn't do well. If you want to reprimand her, don't mess around with her. Yes, I understand. Yang Yi nodded and did not dare to say anything more. No matter whose idea it was, they were in the wrong for doing this. All of them are in the wrong. Mo Henian slammed the table and said angrily, "Moreover, little Yang, you're the head of a family with a net worth of tens of billions. How can you be so inconsiderate? You rode your motorcycles out to play in the middle of the night and disregarded your own safety. Why don't you think about the children? Shishi and Chen are still so young. If anything happens to you." Although Yang Yi knew that he would be fine, when he heard Mo Henian's words, he felt like a teenager who ran out to play games at an internet cafe and was reprimanded by his parents. He agreed with Mo Henian's words, but he was not convinced. Of course, Yang Yi still changed his perspective and criticized himself. He sincerely lowered his head and admitted his mistake. "Dad, you're right. What we did was indeed irresponsible. We won't do it again in the future. It's not just you who were irresponsible. Think about it. What kind of wrong demonstration did you bring to the children? When Shishi grows up and runs away from home like you, how will you feel when you find out?" Mo Henian reprimanded bitterly. "That's right. Shishi might learn. Parents were the template they loved to imitate." Yang Yi really felt a little regretful this time. Zhou Mingyu smiled and said, "You don't have to worry about Shishi. How did you come up with this trick? You actually said that Murphy was taken away by a big bad guy, and that you went to save her. Fortunately, I was smart and didn't expose it. If they knew the truth, it would be bad." "Mom, thank you," Yang Yi said gratefully. "Actually, this wasn't what we wanted. Shishi had a nightmare, and we didn't want them to know about it. So we took advantage of the situation and made up this lie. It's easy to lie, but difficult to cover up a lie." Mo Henian said indignantly. "Speaking of which, there's one more thing. How could you lie to the children and say that big bad guys don't catch little kids?" Zhou Mingyu said reproachfully. "I didn't know until Xian Air mentioned it. That's because Chen is still at home." Yang Yi explained. "Anyway, you shouldn't have said such things. Look at the two children. They don't have any vigilance at all. What if they meet a real bad guy in the future?" Zhou Mingyu said kindly. "When you go back, you have to explain this to the children. Do you understand? You can't leave them alone." Yang Yi nodded seriously. He was convinced by the details pointed out by his mother-in-law. Not only did he nod, but he also wrote it down seriously. Fortunately, Mo Henian's view of Yang Yi had changed a lot. Although he was furious just now, he didn't harp on this matter. After a few more words, he waved his hand and impatiently told Yang Yi to go back and rest. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.